Hello, everyone. Tonight we're slipping quietly into the soft-edged fog of the past, where mornings are cold, ceilings are made of thatch, and your pillow is mostly hay. You're waking up in a medieval village, not exactly Paris, no alarm clock, no phone buzzing, just the low groan of a rooster and the gentle slap of your neighbor's goat wandering into your bedroom because doors are optional when you live in a hut that was built by your cousin using mud and very ambitious sticks. Hey, if you're loving this content, I'd really appreciate it if you could give the video a quick like and hit that subscribe button. Tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice is the smell. It's not terrible, just earthy, like warm bread and damp wool and the faintest hint of something that once resembled cheese. The straw mattress beneath you crackles with each shift, and your back isn't thrilled. You've been sleeping in the same tunic for 5 days straight, and you vaguely remember hearing someone mention fleas in the thatch above. But hey, at least the rat you heard scurrying around last night didn't nibble your face. Progress. You blink toward the crooked wooden shutters. A pale, wintry light filters through, and someone is already walking past, singing a tuneless hymn to St. Cuthbert, who may or may not be the patron saint of not being late to field work. You sit up slowly. There's no glass on the window, just an oiled cloth to keep out the wind somewhat. Your breath mists faintly in the air. You can see your own breath, indoors, cozy, in a frost-bitten sort of way. Stretching sends a tiny avalanche of straw down your back. You brush it off and realize your left ankle is sore, probably from hauling firewood yesterday, or possibly from that time you stepped on a cursed turnip. Hard to say. You look around. The interior is charmingly simple, which is another way of saying there's a bucket for a toilet, a pile of clothes that double as a blanket, and a single spoon you all share. A fire crackles in the hearth, or at least, it did. Now it's just gently smoking, contributing to your daily lung training. There's no clock, of course. Time is measured in church bells, rooster cries, and your stomach grumbling. You're not late. You're just mid-rooster. You shuffle to the door and unlatch it with stiff fingers. Outside, your neighbors are already awake. Marjorie is milking a goat who looks deeply unimpressed. Tom is loudly trying to convince a chicken to come down from the roof, and children barefoot and already sticky with porridge are chasing each other with sticks that may have once been swords, shovels, or both. The mud path outside your hut is, generously speaking, a road. More accurately, it's an ankle-deep, slippery soup of dirt, waste, and hopes. You quickly learn to step in someone else's footprints. They're deep, reliable, and maybe less cursed. You pass a wooden cross nailed to a tree, adorned with what looks like dried flowers and a turnip, some sort of offering, or maybe someone just ran out of vases. Now, let's talk briefly about sleep itself. Historians still argue whether medieval people really had segmented sleep, 2 long stretches, with a first sleep and a waking period in between. Some say folks got up in the middle of the night to pray, mend clothes, or check on livestock. Others claim this waking period was used for whispering quiet gossip or, occasionally, sneaking off for a romantic visit next door. It's unclear. But what is clear, you didn't exactly wake up refreshed. A fringe theory suggests villagers may have used this middle night time to observe dreams and omens. So, if you dreamt of bees, onions, or a crow sneezing well, someone was getting married or excommunicated. Again, the signs were vague. Now fully awake, you inhale deeply. The village smells of wet wood, damp wool, and whatever the baker is burning again. You scratch your head, realize your hat is missing, and begin to wonder how long it's going to take before something falls on you. Spoiler, not long. And thus, your medieval day has begun. You, the slightly shivering, very hungry, questionably washed hero of this sleepy tale. No cell signal, no latte, just you, your itchy tunic, and a long list of things you'll probably get blamed for by sundown. You shuffle back inside, where the air is slightly warmer, but still not what you'd call cozy. The hearth glows faintly last night's fire, now just a smoldering sigh. You grab the bucket tucked in the corner, the one with a lid that never quite closes. This is your chamber pot. You stare at it for a moment, thinking about your life choices, and then you remember this is just how it is. You handle your business quickly, because even your own waste starts judging you if you linger. There's no flush. Obviously, just a short walk to the compost heap later. Or, if you're lazy or unlucky, someone knocks it over and the pigs get interested. Medieval sanitation is a group project. You glance over at the wash basin, a wooden bowl with last week's water and what may or may not be a mouse floating serenely. Washing your face feels optional, but your mother's ghost might haunt you if you skip it. So you splash the freezing water across your cheeks and immediately regret it. No toothpaste, no toothbrush. Instead, you pick up a stick well, a chewed, frayed twig from the hazel tree, and gnaw at it like a confused beaver. This is your tooth cleaning routine. Historians still argue whether medieval people had better teeth than we do today, thanks to less sugar, but less sugar doesn't help when you never floss and you regularly drink ale that could peel paint. You reach for a cloth, scratchy, brown, and vaguely damp and dry your face. Then it's time to freshen up. Medieval style. You sniff your armpit, wince slightly, and dab yourself with a linen rag dipped in rosemary water. That's your deodorant. It's fine. It'll wear off by noon. A little side note. Monks sometimes washed more regularly than peasants, mostly to stay pure before prayers. But the average person, let's just say a full body wash, was a special occasion, like weddings, coronations, or new plague outbreaks. Now you check your clothes. They've been folded neatly, by which we mean they were shoved into a wicker basket and are now vaguely shaped like a person. You tug on your shirt, which is made of something called linsey woolsey, a charming blend of linen and wool designed to make you itch in all seasons. Your pants, called brays, are basically fancy medieval boxer shorts, secured with a complicated knot system. There are no zippers, no elastic, just string, patience, and mild anxiety every time you need to pee. Over that, you pull on a tunic that smells faintly of old soup and herbal poultice. It used to be green, or maybe brown, or possibly both. Then come the hose medieval leggings, not to be confused with anything comfortable. They're held up with garters that dig into your thighs like judgmental worms. Finally, you grab your shoes, leather things that resemble boiled ravioli. They offer minimal arch support and even less waterproofing. You'll be slipping through mud like a newborn foal by the end of the day. Now for your hair, it's a mess. No shampoo, no conditioner, no detangler, just fingers. A prayer to St. Comworth, not real, and maybe a hat. You find your coif a linen cap tied under the chin that keeps your hair neat and your ears warm. Sort of. Mostly it just makes you look like someone who's about to churn butter while solving a murder. You're nearly ready when someone knocks. It's your neighbor, Beatrix, asking if you've seen her duck. You haven't, but you agree to keep an eye out. Ducks go missing around here. It's usually the blacksmith's dog or the priest's mysterious fasting. With your morning ritual complete, you prepare to head outside again. A child runs past, barefoot and already sticky with breakfast porridge. Someone yells about missing socks, and a rooster pecks your foot just because. This is what morning looks like in your medieval village. No emails, no to-do list app, just you, your twig toothbrush, and a strong hope that breakfast will involve something edible. You step outside again, this time dressed, mildly scrubbed, and ready to greet the day, or at least to endure it with moderate enthusiasm. The mud is still mud. The air still bites. A raven stares down from the roof like it knows something about your future and doesn't want to spoil the surprise. Your stomach grumbles in protest. It's breakfast time, or as medieval folks called it, breaking your fast, which sounds noble, but generally just means eating whatever hasn't gone stale. You trudge toward the communal bakehouse. It's not your personal kitchen. You don't have a kitchen. What you have is a pot, a stick, and hope. Communal ovens are where the village does its baking, a kind of shared microwave, but one you have to book 3 days in advance and pay for in barley. You nod at the baker's apprentice, a sleepy boy with flour in his hair and a burn mark shaped suspiciously like a spoon. He hands you back your loaf coarse rye bread, dark as secrets and hard as destiny. There's a tiny lump baked into the crust, a bread tag, of sorts, to prove it's yours. The bread smells good, in that rustic, chew for 20 minutes sort of way. You break off a hunk, gnaw thoughtfully, and try not to chip a molar. This is your primary meal today. There might be ale later, maybe some cheese, but mostly this bread. You chew slowly and try to pretend it's a croissant. It's not. It never will be. Someone next to you pulls out a pouch of dried peas, soaked overnight and mashed into a cold paste. Peas porridge. Historians still argue whether this actually tasted good or if people just gave up fighting it. A fringe recipe even includes garlic and mint. Adventurous. If you're trying to impress a local goat, you add a drizzle of honey if you're lucky enough to have some. It was collected last week from a hive that may or may not have belonged to the abbey. The monks haven't noticed yet. You mentally prepare a confession just in case. You take another bite and glance across the green. People are gathering. It's time for morning assignments. There's no schedule posted in anywhere, just a loud man named Edwin who tells you what to do based on your age, size, and whether or not you still owe him a chicken. Today, you're assigned to wood gathering. Excellent. That means walking to the edge of the forest, avoiding wolves, gathering damp sticks, and hauling them back without complaining too loudly. But first, a brief detour to the animal pen. You've been asked to check on the pigs. They've escaped twice this week and developed a taste for unguarded laundry. You find them snuffling around the fence, eyeing a pile of socks like it owes them money. You toss them a few apple cores and make a mental note. Pigs are smarter than they look. One even seems to wink at you. Could be gas, could be plotting, hard to say. Across the path, Marjorie has set up a small stand with herbal tonics. She waves you over and hands you something labeled morning cordial. It smells like mint, vinegar, and something floral, maybe lavender, maybe regret. You sip it politely. Your tongue goes numb. This is probably fine. Scholars still debate the real effectiveness of medieval tonics. Some recipes actually contained helpful herbs like yarrow or chamomile. Others featured ingredients like ground pearls or batwing, sometimes both, always artisanal. As you return home to grab your gathering sack, a scratchy burlap nightmare, held together by optimism, you realize your day has only just begun, and already your hands are cold, your shoes are wet, and your face is mildly tingly from Marjorie's mystery potion. But you're alive. You have bread. You haven't been accused of heresy today. Not yet. And that, in the 14th century, is what we call a good morning. You sling the burlap sack over your shoulder and begin the walk toward the woods. It's not exactly a peaceful forest stroll. This isn't some curated nature trail with signs about butterflies and optional yoga stations. This is dense, damp woodland. The path is more suggestion than reality, and it's lined with thorns, low-hanging branches, and the occasional alarming rustle. You tread carefully, boots squelching in mud with every step. The wind whistles through the trees, and the smell of wet moss and old mushrooms fills your nose. It's a smell you're learning to accept. You pause to tug your hose back up. Medieval leggings have all the charm of clingy socks soaked in cold tea. Once in the woods, you start looking for firewood, but not just in any wood. Dry wood is ideal, but it's rare. Most of what you find is damp and rotting. Perfect if you're looking to invent the world's first mosquito sanctuary. You pick up a stick, sniff it for mold and unofficial peasant tradition, and toss it in the sack. Repeat, over and over. Midway through, you hear a rustle. You freeze. There's a boar out here somewhere, and it's not the polite kind that smiles for tapestries. Boars in medieval Europe are like tiny, furious tanks. You grip your stick slightly tighter and hum a tuneless chant to convince yourself you're intimidating. The noise fades, probably just a squirrel, a very aggressive squirrel. You get back to collecting, and soon the sack is half full and your arms are itchy. But you spot something odd, a bundle of herbs tied with red twine, dangling from a tree branch. That's either a charm against fairies or someone's version of forest feng shui. You decide not to touch it. Why risk a curse before lunch? Superstitions are thick in the air here. People hang herbs to keep spirits away. Some smear ash on their doors. There's a man in the next village who won't drink from wooden cups because of a dream he had in 1304. Historians still argue whether this fear of spirits and curses was rooted in old pagan beliefs or just boredom and a lot of fermented turnips. You finally gather enough kindling and begin the slow walk back, sack dragging behind like a reluctant child. By the time you return to the village, your boots are soaked, your tunic smells like mushroom stew, and your nose is pink from the cold. But you did it. You brought back firewood. Edwin gives you a nod of vague approval and hands you a stale piece of oatcake. Victory has never tasted more dry. Next, you pass the blacksmith's shed, where someone's already shouting. The bellows wheeze like an asthmatic dragon, and the air smells like hot iron and sweaty ambition. Inside, the blacksmith, who everyone calls Old Radolf, even though he's only 32 pounds, something vaguely blade shaped. You stop for a moment to watch. It's oddly soothing, the rhythm of hammer on metal. You'd never admit it, but part of you wants to try. Maybe make a dagger, or at least a coat hook, but you're not apprenticed, and Radolf doesn't like when people breathe near his anvil. Still, you get to talking. He tells you about a new order from the Reeve, 20 nails by the end of the week. You nod, like you know how much work that is. You don't, but it's polite. You thank him for the chat and move on, sack still in hand. The morning now leaning toward midday. The sun peeks out for one glorious minute, then ducks behind a cloud. Embarrassed to be seen here, you head back home for your midday rest, a short one, because there's no siesta in the feudal system. Still, you deserve a moment. You lean against the door frame, eat the rest of your oatcake, and think about lunch. Maybe there'll be onions, maybe not. All things considered, you've survived the first half of the day. Only another 8 or 9 hours to go. You sit on a stool near your hearth, feet stretched toward the low flames like a lizard pretending not to nap. The morning's work is behind you, and now you've earned the most sacred of medieval traditions, a brief, slightly uncomfortable midday rest. The bread's still sitting in your gut like a stone, but it's giving you just enough energy to fantasize about lunch. You think about stewed leeks. You think about cheese. Then you remember you live in a cottage where lunch is whatever hasn't been nibbled by mice. You glance at the shelf where you left your bowl last night. There's a suspicious nibble taken out of the wooden edge. You sigh. No mice today. Please. Not after the last time, when one ran across your face mid-dream and you slapped yourself so hard you gave yourself a nosebleed. Still, you rise and reach for the small clay pot on the shelf. Inside is your humble contribution to the lunch cause onions, dried nettles, and a suspicious root that might be parsnip, or might be turnip, or might be something you should never have picked. You scrape it into a pot with some yesterday's water and put it near the fire. Now we wait. As the soup warms, not boils, just sort of shivers, you grab a small stool and open the window shutter to let in some light. Outside, a neighbor's goat is eating someone's laundry. This is not unusual. You recognize the shirt and make a mental note to mention it to Beatrix later. If the goat leaves enough of it, you tear off a piece of bread to dip in the stew. It's barely soft enough to soak, but you pretend it's delicious. Somewhere in the world, people are eating roast duck with cinnamon glaze. You are not those people. There's a knock on your door, 3 taps. Evenly spaced, It's Elric, the tanner's apprentice. He's come by to ask if you'll help move a barrel later. You agree, because refusing Elric means risking his mother's disapproval, and she can outglare a saint. Before he leaves, he offers you a small jar of something. For flavor, he says. You peek inside. It's rendered animal fat with chopped wild garlic. You nearly weep with joy. Flavor. This is culinary treasure. You add a spoonful to the soup, and suddenly it tastes like hope. Historians still argue whether the average medieval person actually suffered from a lack of flavor in their meals. Salt, garlic, and vinegar were widely used, though only in small amounts. Spices were luxury goods, saffron, cloves, pepper, all imported, all outrageously expensive. You, on the other hand, have foraged tang. You slurp quietly. The stew is not terrible. You chew slowly, watching as the smoke curls up the chimney and wondering how many spiders live in there. Probably lots. You try not to think about it. Too late. Just as you're finishing the last mouthful, someone cries out from across the green. You peer out. It's the Reeve, shouting about fence repairs. This means it's time for your second act of the day labor duty. You groan softly, then louder for effect. No one hears. You gather your tools anyway, an axe with a loose head, a wooden mallet, and some bent nails, and head out toward the sheep pasture. The fence is indeed in shambles. A few posts are tilted like drunken soldiers, and a section has collapsed entirely, allowing the sheep to wander. One of them looks particularly smug. You get to work, hauling posts upright and pounding them back into the mud. The axe barely cuts through the damp ground. So you switch to grunting and stomping, a technique passed down through generations, possibly because nothing else works. As you sweat and struggle, you think about how deeply fences mattered, not just to keep animals in, but to define land, inheritance, even marriages. A poorly placed fence could spark decades of family feuds somewhere nearby. You hear a sheep bleat, possibly in judgment. By the time you finish, your hands are blistered and your knees are speckled with mud. The Reeve gives you a vague nod of approval. You treasure this moment more than your last birthday. You walk home again, tired but not broken, dreaming of resting your feet by the fire and maybe stealing a nap. Just 5 minutes. 5 medieval minutes, which, as we both know, will turn into another task before you can even take off your shoes. You make it back to your cottage and, for the briefest moment, entertain the fantasy of lying down. Just a quick stretch on the straw-stuffed mattress, maybe even closing your eyes for 30 seconds. But you're halfway to the bed when a voice calls from outside your window. Oi, you still owe us thatching help. You freeze, you forgot, again. The neighbor's roof sprang a leak last week, and today's the day they're patching it, preferably before it rains. Again, with the kind of sky that hangs heavy like an overripe turnip. Rain is never more than a passive-aggressive cloud away. You sigh, lace up your damp boots once more, and trudge across the green. The neighbor's house isn't far, and the thatching supplies are piled nearby bundles of straw, a rake, and an old ladder that creaks louder than a cranky friar with gout. Thatching, you quickly discover, is a special kind of tedious. You climb up the slanted roof, and are immediately greeted by a puff of dust and a strong whiff of old chicken. Apparently, some feathers made it into the straw bundle. You try not to breathe too deeply. From up here, the village looks small, smoky chimneys, wandering geese, children chasing each other with sticks pretending they're knights. You spot someone chasing a pig. You don't ask why. No one ever wins that chase. As you work the straw into place, tying it with cords and tucking it tightly, you start to notice the rhythm of it. There's a calming, repetitive motion. Rake, tuck, tie, rake, tuck, tie. You're even getting slightly better at it, if better means slightly less terrible. Your neighbor, Oswin, calls up praise. That's not half bad, which, in medieval terms, is a standing ovation. Fun fact, many roofs in this period were thatched with layers of straw that could last up to 30 years if maintained, but maintaining it meant constant vigilance. Birds loved to steal bits for nests. Rain soaked through if the pitch was too shallow, and rats made entire housing developments out of neglected rooftops. Historians still debate just how widespread thatch was versus wooden shingles, depending on region and wealth. But in your life, if it's not straw, you can't afford it. While up on the roof, you swap stories with Oswin. He mentions a traveling tinker who came through 2 weeks ago, selling metal pots and strange riddles. You tell him about the mouse incident. He tells you about the time he woke up with a hedgehog in his shoe. Laughter feels good, like shaking off an itchy wool cloak. For a moment, you're not just surviving the day, you're enjoying it. Then the ladder shifts, just a little, just enough to remind you how gravity works. You clutch the thatch, heart pounding in your chest, like it's trying to reenact the Battle of Hastings. You call down for someone to steady it. Oswin does, eventually, but not before making 3 jokes at your expense. You allow it. You're alive. Once the patch is done and the roof feels solid, you clamber down, arms covered in straw, scratches, and sweat. Oswin offers a chunk of cheese in thanks. You accept it like a knight being offered a goblet after battle. You walk back to your cottage again, the cheese clutched like treasure. You don't even know what kind it is. It could be goat, cow, or whatever wandered past the barn. But it's cheese, and that makes you royalty for 10 delicious bites. Once home, you collapse onto your stool and stare into the fire. You consider taking your boots off, but you're not sure you'll be able to get them back on. You nibble the cheese slowly, listening to the distant sound of a hammer from the smithy, a dog barking, and somewhere, someone singing off-key. Probably Agnes. She means well. You glance at your hands, blistered, stained, bits of straw still clinging to your sleeves. Your tunic smells like smoke and onions. You have never looked less glamorous, and yet, for now, you're content. You've roofed, fetched, nailed, chopped, and earned that questionable soup, and it's not even sundown. In medieval times, rest doesn't come often, but when it does, even 5 minutes beside a hearth can feel like a luxury suite. You're nearly convinced your body has fused with the stool when the bell rings. Not a real bell, mind you, more of a clanging pot, bashed rhythmically by a boy with too much energy and no sense of volume. It's the village signal assembly time, which usually means someone's lost a cow or insulted the reeve. Again, You drag yourself upright and join the slow, shuffling migration toward the meeting green. A crowd's already forming old Marjorie with her basket of herbs, the blacksmith's apprentice covered in soot, two chickens that definitely weren't invited, and the priest, who looks like he'd rather be anywhere else. You edge toward the back. Fewer questions get asked of people standing in the back. At the center stands the Reeve, holding what looks suspiciously like a damp scroll. He clears his throat and begins reading out the week's pronouncements. A sheep has gone missing again. The west path is too muddy for carts still, and there's to be a reevaluation of firewood quotas. Your shoulders slump in unison with half the crowd. Firewood quotas mean more counting, and someone always counts wrong. Next comes the announcement you truly dreaded. It's your village's turn to host the bishop's traveling clerk. This means cleaning, like real cleaning. You whisper a prayer to whichever saint handles sudden inspections. The clerk's visit, part tax collector, part record keeper, part walking reminder that the church sees all happens once or twice a year. He'll want a proper meal, a place to sleep, and answers to mildly invasive questions. Do you own a pig? Did you pay your tithe in full? Has anyone been seen brewing ale without permission? Historians still argue whether these traveling clerks were more feared or loathed. Probably both. But one thing is certain, no one relaxes when the clerk is in town, especially not if their garden's full of questionable mushrooms. As the meeting ends, you gather in a small huddle with your neighbors, assigning tasks. You draw latrine maintenance. Of course you do. It's the medieval equivalent of losing a bet. You trudge back to your cottage, grab the long-handled scoop, and set to work behind the communal privy. The scent is, let's just say, aggressive. You breathe through your mouth and pretend you're anywhere else. A flower field, a bakery, a monastery that only smells like incense and quiet. Still, this is your reality. Waste pits were part of life, and often dangerously close to drinking water. You recall the story of the next village over, where a well had to be abandoned after a pig fell in. You've never trusted wells the same way since. A fringe tidbit floats to mind how some manor houses in France built guardrobes directly over moats. Convenient. Yes. Sanitary, absolutely not, but impressively inventive. You try not to imagine the sound. When the waste work is done, you wash your hands in the cold stream behind the church, scrubbing until your skin feels raw. Soap's a luxury. Yours is homemade lye and ash, stored in a cracked jar that smells like old bark. It does the job. Mostly. With daylight fading, you help scrub the meeting hall's benches, sweep the dirt floor smooth with a bundled stick broom, and hang a garland of faded dried flowers over the door. You found them 3 months ago during a walk and had a hunch they'd come in handy. You were right. Congratulations, you are now head of decorative planning. Finally, it's time to cook something clerk-worthy. You and 3 other villagers combine your ingredients: lentils, some barley, a suspicious sausage, and a pinch of mustard seed. One of you actually has a carrot. It's like you're hosting royalty. As the stew simmers, you sit on an overturned bucket outside, watching the sky change. It's a strange kind of calm. Somewhere a bell tolls for evening prayer. You stretch your legs and notice, for the first time today, that your right boot has a hole. That explains the squelch earlier. Inside, someone starts humming. The smell of the stew wafts through the open door, and for a second, just one, you feel proud. Your village may be muddy and chaotic and full of foul where they shouldn't be, but when it counts, it pulls together. The clerk arrives at sundown. He's wearing robes just slightly too clean for comfort. You bow your head politely and usher him in, praying silently that he doesn't ask about the state of the goat pen or the fact that your tithe was mostly paid in turnips. As he begins his meal and flips through his ledgers, you retreat to the edge of the room, half watching, half dreaming. You've survived the day again, and with any luck, you'll survive tomorrow too, latrine duty or not. Morning arrives with the dulcet tones of someone yelling about missing laundry. Again, you blink awake, not entirely sure where you are. It takes a few seconds to remember you fell asleep in a chair near the hearth. Boots still on, arms folded like a disgruntled owl. Your back disagrees with every decision that led to this position. Outside, the village is already in motion. Carts creak, hens squawk, and someone's trying to barter a fish for a half loaf of bread. The traveling clerk is leaving today, which means a flurry of last-minute questions, forgotten documents, and villagers suddenly remembering they own something taxable. You pull on your slightly less damp cloak and shuffle toward the village green, where the clerk is already surrounded. He's scribbling with a quill that looks far too elegant for a place where chickens regularly interrupt public speeches. The air smells of wood smoke and that one goat no one claims. You ease into the edge of the crowd and try to look both helpful and invisible. Suddenly, the clerk points at you. You there. You helped prepare the stew. You nod slowly. He squints, scribbles something into his ledger, and mutters, "Acceptable seasoning, unusual texture." You're not sure if that's a compliment or an insult, but you take it as a win. As he prepares to leave, you overhear him mention something curious in a nearby shire. A woman paid her entire rent with eels. Yes, eels. Slippery, wriggling, mildly terrifying rent. Apparently, they were prized as both food and status symbols. Some monasteries even kept eel ponds. Historians still argue about the scale of the so-called eel economy. Was it a quirk of the times or a regional obsession? Either way, you now picture your landlord arriving with a bucket instead of a bill. It's unsettling. The clerk departs with his mule and his mildew-scented cloak, and the village exhales as one. People immediately begin redoing everything they cleaned just for show. The benches are scuffed again. The soup pot has gone back to questionable, and the garland above the door is nibbled by a goat. You retreat to your own cottage for a moment of stillness. You finally take off your boots, gingerly, as if they might bite. Then you peel off your tunic stiff with yesterday's smoke and hang it near the fire. The room smells like wood ash and faint onions. It could be worse. After a quick rinse at the stream cold enough to convince your soul to exit your body temporarily, you decide to tend to your small patch of garden. It's more weeds than food, but a few proud leeks and some stubborn sorrel hang on bravely. Gardening in the Middle Ages was both necessity and mild comedy. You had to fight everything frost, insects, theft by goose, but sometimes A miracle would sprout a juicy turnip, a handful of wild strawberries, or once, a potato looking thing that turned out to be a rock. You still keep it as a reminder. As you dig gently with a wooden trowel, you find something odd, an old iron nail, bent at a strange angle, probably from a wagon or some forgotten repair. Still, it feels important. You set it on your windowsill, a good luck charm, maybe, or a future tetanus hazard. Who's to say? From across the lane, you hear singing, real singing this time, not the warbling goose like kind. It's young Edith, the shepherd's daughter, humming a tune about bread. Yes, bread. Entire medieval songs existed just to praise decent loaves. There's one that includes the line, "Praise be the golden crust." That's commitment. Inspired, you check your bread stash. A hard lump that may once have been a roll stares back at you. You give it a hopeful knock. It echoes. You soak it in broth and call it breakfast. Midway through chewing, you remember it's your turn on ditch duty. The village has a series of ditches and drainage channels designed to prevent flooding, direct waste, and occasionally hide from your responsibilities. You grab a spade and head off with a few others, including a boy who keeps trying to race worms. The ditch is exactly as pleasant as expected damp, full of suspicious mud, and possibly a frog civilization. As you dig, someone mentions a story from the last big rain. A pig was swept clear into the alehouse. No one was sure whether to chase it or charge it for a pint. You work slowly, rhythmically. The spade sinks, the mud sloshes, the sun climbs higher. Despite the backache, there's something calming about it. Maybe it's the repetition. Maybe it's the fact that, for once, you're not being yelled at by a clerk. Eventually, the ditch looks respectable, or at least less like a trench from an ancient battle. You wipe your hands on your tunic and admire the sludge-free channel. Victory. Heading home, you pass the mill, where the wheel creaks and turns like an old song. A sack of flour tips slightly as you go by, spilling a thin white trail. You stop, pick it up, retie the cord. The miller nods and thanks. That's it. That's the exchange. No gold, no fanfare, just daily life. Back at your cottage, you boil water for nettle tea, tuck the bent nail under your pillow for luck, and stretch out on your straw mattress. Not to nap, of course, just to rest your eyes. You're woken not by a rooster or a bell, or even the usual neighbor arguing with his goose this time. It's the smell of burning, not dangerous burning, mind you, just the sharp, unmistakable scent of someone ruining porridge again. You sit up slowly, straw sticking to your sleeve, and peer out your window. Sure enough, it's poor Thomas, flapping his arms at a smoking pot while muttering medieval curses involving onions and questionable saints. His attempt at breakfast has now turned into a village-wide olfactory incident. You decide to go for a walk. The morning is brisk and damp. Dew clings to every surface. Your feet make soft squelching noises in the mud. Somewhere in the trees, a woodpecker taps rhythmically, like nature's carpenter with a hangover. You follow a path that winds behind the village, past the neglected cart path, and into the edge of the forest. It's not quite a proper forest, more of a thicket, really, but it's quiet, and that's what you need. Time to think, or not think, mostly not think. You come across a cluster of mushrooms at the base of a tree, oddly shaped, slightly iridescent, definitely suspicious. You remember the warning red caps are a gamble, blue ones mean bad dreams, and anything that glows should probably be avoided unless you want to speak fluent squirrel for a week. A fringe tidbit you once overheard from the herbalist drifts into your mind. Some monks believed mushrooms grew from lightning strikes. Others thought they were moon spawn. Either way, you decide to leave them alone. Further along, you find an abandoned wattle fence, partially overtaken by moss, likely once a pig enclosure. It looks oddly peaceful now, like it gave up trying to be useful and embraced the quiet life. You perch on a dryish stump nearby and nibble a bit of oat cake from your pouch. It's hard enough to chip a tooth, but it fills the void. You watch a line of ants navigate a twig like it's a grand boulevard. You envy their clarity of purpose. Eventually, you circle back toward the village, passing the old well. There's a bucket tied up with far too much hope and not enough rope. The water's clean today, miracle, so you take a sip, carefully avoiding eye contact with the suspicious snail on the rim. Back in the center of the village, things have taken a turn. There's a commotion by the alehouse. Not a fight. Exactly. More of a heated debate over whether a certain man owes another 3 buttons or 2. The argument has drawn a small crowd. The goose is back, possibly refereeing. The alewife steps out, hands on hips, and declares, "Anyone still yelling in 3 seconds gets a mug of my worst cider. That quiets everyone down. No one wants the cider. It once stripped the paint off a door." You slip away and head toward the parish workshop. It's where things go when they break plows. Baskets. Hearts. Well, not hearts. There's a separate shed for those. Inside, a carpenter is fixing a wheel with the intensity of someone performing surgery. You help by handing him nails and nodding solemnly when he curses the wood for having opinions. Wood in the Middle Ages is temperamental, especially after rain. You remember reading well, hearing from a traveling peddler that Norse settlers would talk to their boats as if they were people. They'd offer them names, praise, sometimes even beer. Historians still debate whether this was superstition or simply good public relations with your canoe. The carpenter finishes the wheel. You carry it to the cart outside and affix it with something close to competence. It doesn't wobble too much. Small victories. As thanks, the carpenter gives you half a meat pie wrapped in a cabbage leaf. You thank him profusely and take it to the riverside to eat in peace. It's delicious, probably squirrel. Or not, best not to ask. By late afternoon, the sky has shifted from bright gray to ominous gray, and there's talk of a visiting monk giving a sermon in the chapel. You consider going, not for spiritual enlightenment, mostly for the dry benches and faint smell of incense. Inside, it's dim and echoing. The monk has a voice like melted butter and a face that suggests he's told the same parable 6,000 times. You zone out halfway through a story about a saint who slept in a tree for 40 years. Impressive, but also confusing. Did he build a nest? Afterward, the monk offers a blessing to anyone who helped with firewood this week. You stand awkwardly, unsure if fetching a single damp log counts. He blesses you anyway. You feel oddly validated. As the day winds down, you return home. Your roof hasn't collapsed. Your goat hasn't escaped. Your turnips are still buried and hopeful. You stretch, then light a stub of tallow candle. The flame flickers gently. The room glows like a scene from a very dusty painting. You sigh. Tomorrow, you'll probably be assigned to help with the tannery, which means smells, but that's a problem for future you. Tonight, you roll onto your straw mattress, wrap up in your scratchy wool blanket, and let your mind drift to moon mushrooms, eel taxes, and saints in trees. Today begins with bells, church bells, and not the pleasant kind that ring politely in the distance. These are the clanging, urgent, somebody's goat is in the nave again type. You groan, stretch, and rub your face with hands that still smell faintly of yesterday's squirrel pie. You're beginning to suspect you might never truly be clean again. Stepping outside, you find that the bells were not, in fact, a goat emergency. They're announcing a feast day. Of which saint? You ask, well, no one is exactly sure. The chalkboard near the chapel reads simply, Blessed something, be kind, bring turnips. You decide to go along with it. Feast days in the Middle Ages aren't always what the name suggests. Sometimes it means roasted meats and dancing. Other times, it's watery porridge, extra church, and one very out-of-tune flute. You're hoping for the former, but you prepare for the latter. First up is the procession. You're handed a candle that's already half melted and a ribbon of suspicious origin to tie around your wrist. You fall in line behind Edith the shepherd's daughter, who has somehow trained her lamb to walk with her. Show off. The procession weaves through the village, around the fields, and back to the chapel. It's not unpleasant. The air is soft. The sun peeks shyly through clouds. Someone is humming a hymn that might also be a drinking song. When the walking is done, the priest says a few words about humility, patience, and the value of silent prayer. Then he talks for 47 more minutes about bread. You contemplate the nature of time. Eventually, the sermon ends and the festivities begin. Tables are brought out. A few brave dishes appear: flatbreads, some lentil stew, a pie of indeterminate contents, and one particularly proud villager who unveils a bowl of sugared rose petals. You nibble a bit of everything. The lentils are decent. The pie might contain turnip or boot leather. Either way, it's warm. You overhear someone mention a very old law that requires any fish longer than a loaf of bread to be gifted to the local lord. This has never once happened, but the idea lives on in local gossip. That's why we cut the big ones in half, says a fisherman with a wink. Historians still debate whether these obscure food laws were widely enforced or just symbolic, but the fear of accidentally being taxed for your trout was very real. As the sun shifts overhead, the games begin. There's stick tossing, a riddle contest, and a highly competitive game of catch the pig. It goes exactly as you'd expect: chaos, squealing, and one very muddy priest. Your personal favorite, however, is the who can nap fastest competition, a tradition invented by children but adopted by adults in recent years. You take your place on a blanket near the shade and proceed to demonstrate your talent. You don't win, the shepherd's lamb does. It's not fair. Animals are natural champions at looking serene. After a bit more food and a lot more small talk, is your roof still leaking? No, just selectively ventilated. You're roped into helping with cleanup, feast day or not. The spoons still need washing, and the goat has to be lured off the woodpile. Once the tables are cleared and the lentils officially declared not deadly, you take a walk to stretch your legs and your patience. You wander toward the village edge, where a crumbling stone wall marks the boundary between ours and the wild. No one remembers who built it. Some say Romans, others say giants with a sense of humor. The truth is probably less exciting, just farmers with too many rocks and too few options. You sit on the wall and watch a kestrel hover in the distance, motionless except for the occasional flick of its wings. It's beautiful and also terrifying. If you're a mouse, you think about how the world is wider than this village, that somewhere out there are cities with towers, seas with ships, and markets that sell spices you've never tasted. But here, there's a kind of rhythm, a simplicity. It's maddening and oddly comforting. A boy approaches carrying a scroll. He unrolls it dramatically and declares, "There will be a riddle contest rematch next Tuesday. Bring your best words." You nod solemnly. "I shall bring 3." He looks confused and walks away. You return home as dusk rolls in, painting the village in soft blues and grays. Smoke curls from a dozen chimneys. Someone plays a flute slightly more in tune than expected. It's almost pleasant. You feed your goat a bit of carrot and hang your damp cloak by the fire. There's one crust of bread left, which you soften in some warm broth. You chew slowly, savoring every hint of flavor like it's roast duck from a king's table. Then you find your way to bed, straw mattress, scratchy blanket, slightly lumpy pillow that may or may not contain a mouse. You lie back and let the gentle weight of the day settle over you like fog. Just before sleep claims you, you wonder what saint you were supposed to be celebrating. You decide it was probably the patron saint of muddy shoes. Seems fitting. You wake up the next morning to the soothing sound of hammering, rhythmic, persistent, and entirely too close to your ear for comfort. A peek out your window reveals the source your neighbor is attempting to fix his door again. By fix, you suspect he means hit it until it gives up. You rub your eyes, stretch, and wonder if you should go offer to help or at least suggest that maybe, just maybe, the door's problem isn't anger related. But before you can decide, a distant shout draws your attention. Market day. That's right, once a fortnight. Your village hosts what it generously calls a market. In reality, it's a few tarps, a lot of shouting, and 3 people selling identical onions. Still, it's an event. You throw on your least damp tunic, scoop up a few sad coins from your pouch, and make your way to the village green. There's already a modest crowd. Someone's selling pickled turnips. Someone else is loudly insisting their goose is part swan. And a young girl is walking a cat on a string like it's a prize pony. You wander past stalls, eyeing dried herbs, wooden spoons, and what may or may not be a taxidermied stoat dressed like a bishop. You decide not to ask. At the far end, there's a cloth seller showing off bolts of rough linen dyed in colors so muted they might actually be invisible. You overhear a debate about which shade of brown is the fancy one. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants really wore only dull earth tones, or whether that's a myth we've perpetuated through too many beige museum mannequins. Some evidence suggests red, green, and even bright yellow were more common than we think if you could afford the dye. Of course, a passing friar offers you a sample of honeyed nuts, then immediately asks for a donation. You give him a pebble and a polite nod. He does not look amused. You stop at a stall selling wax figurines. The merchant explains that they're for protection, luck, or romantic confusion. You consider buying one shaped like a chicken, but worry what message that might send. Nearby, a traveling entertainer juggles apples while balancing on a barrel. He's not great. One apple hits a spectator. Apologies are made. The barrel rolls away. Show over. You find yourself drawn to an old woman selling books, or what counts as books. A few are pages sewn together with rough thread. Others are loose leaves tied with twine. She sees you looking and gestures for you to pick one. You choose a worn packet with illustrations of strange sea creatures. One looks like a fish with a human face. Another is described as the polite squid of the West. You're not sure if it's scientific or satirical. Either way, it's your kind of bedtime reading. You give her your last coin, and she smiles with exactly one tooth. It's a very friendly tooth. Lunch comes in the form of a meat pastry that may once have contained actual meat. You eat it while sitting on a fence, watching a man try to auction off a cart with 3 wheels and an aggressive personality. In the afternoon, you visit the fortune teller's tent, not because you believe in fortunes, but because it's raining now and her tent is dry. She offers to read your palm. She studies it seriously, frowns. You will take a long journey, she says. Soon. You nod. That's what they always say. She pauses, then adds, and you will lose a shoe to a goose. You blink. You thank her for the insight and leave quickly, checking behind you for avian threats. The rain lets up just as the market begins to wind down. Merchants pack their wares, dogs shake themselves dry, and a child loudly declares he has bartered his way to 3 onions and half a pie crust. A good day's work. You walk home slowly, passing puddles and squelching fields. The air smells like wet wool and something slightly celebratory. Maybe someone splurged on garlic. At home, you light a candle, peel off your damp tunic, and settle in with your book of weird sea monsters. You make it 3 pages before sleep tries to kidnap you. But before it succeeds, your neighbor knocks. He's holding a piece of his door. I fixed it, he says proudly. You nod. With what? He thinks for a moment. Spite, mostly. Fair enough. You bid him good night, curl under your blanket, and try not to dream of squids with facial expressions. You wake the next day to a rather serious banging again, only this time it's not your neighbor committing acts of violence against his furniture. It's the village beadle making his rounds, knocking on every door with the authority of someone who once met a bishop's cousin and has never let anyone forget it. You crack open the door and are greeted by his usual scowl, all residents to the commons. He grunts. Inspection day. Ah, yes, Inspection Day, a thrilling tradition where an official from the nearest manor, or sometimes just a very enthusiastic scribe, comes to ensure that your house is still standing, your roof is sort of legal, and your goat hasn't committed tax evasion. You dress in your least patched tunic and smooth your hair with rainwater from a bucket. It doesn't help much, but it's the effort that counts. Down at the commons, the villagers are already assembling. The blacksmith's apprentice is arguing with the baker about whether a chicken can count as a dependent for tax purposes. The miller's wife has brought a chart. It's labeled "Prove We're Not Lying." Soon enough, the inspector arrives. He's tall, thin, and wrapped in a cloak that says "I work indoors." He carries a ledger so heavy it may contain ancient secrets or just an aggressive number of footnotes. He begins with the livestock count. One by one, the villagers step forward and declare their animals. 2 sheep, 1 temperamental goose, 3 hens, all suspicious, a pig with low self-esteem. The inspector nods solemnly, scribbling things down in a way that suggests none of it matters unless you're 3 chickens short and also behind on your grain tithe. Then it's on to housing. He walks through each home with the beetle, occasionally tapping beams and asking deeply personal questions like, "Is this your original hearth? And why does your floor squelch?" When he gets to your home, he stops at the doorway and raises an eyebrow. "You've got moss growing on your north wall." You nod. Very fashionable this season. He doesn't laugh. He writes something down, probably insubordinate moss enjoyer. He checks your hearth, your storage pots, and your ceiling beams. You proudly mention that you haven't had a roof leak in almost 4 days. He grunts, unimpressed. Historians still debate how strict these inspections were. Some records suggest they were bureaucratic formalities. Others show villagers fined for such heinous offenses as excessively creaky doors or flower hoarding via suspicious sacks. After your inspection, you join the others near the village green, where folks are sharing news and trading tips for how to get through this with minimal coin loss and ego damage. Someone says the inspector once fined a man for keeping his goat too enthusiastically indoors. Someone else claims he's secretly afraid of ducks. There is no proof, but it's comforting to imagine. As the sun rises higher, the inspector moves on to tools and equipment. He asks the blacksmith to demonstrate the sturdiness of a plow blade by hitting it with a rock. The blacksmith obliges, accidentally dents it, and then charges the inspector for repairs. Lunch is delayed again because someone has to produce an inventory of grain sacks and explain, in detail, what happened to the extra 2 from last month. You offer a hunk of bread to the Reeves assistant, who's been holding the ink pot for 4 hours straight. He nods in quiet thanks, looking like a man 1-page entry out from open rebellion. The final act of inspection day is the communal oath-taking. Everyone stands in a rough circle, raises a hand, and recites a pledge that, loosely translated, amounts to "I definitely live here, I haven't hidden any livestock, and I agree not to start a rebellion unless it's really justified." Then the inspector closes his ledger with a dramatic snap, declares the village generally compliant, and leaves in a cart pulled by a mule that is visibly judging everyone. As the cart disappears down the muddy road, a collective sigh escapes the villagers. The tension lifts. Someone breaks out a fiddle. The blacksmith opens a small keg. You suspect this is less about celebration and more about stress relief. You return home and finally eat something cheese, if one uses the term loosely. Outside, the air has that post rain crispness, and the scent of someone's fire roasted leeks wafts across the lane. It's strangely peaceful. You sit by your hearth and reread part of your sea creature manuscript. This time, you find a footnote suggesting that one particularly smiley fish may have been based on an eel or a mayor. The ink is smudged. Later, just as sleep begins to tiptoe toward you, there's another knock at the door. It's your neighbor again, this time holding a large bowl. Excess stew, he says proudly. I made too much. It contains things. You take it. You do not ask. You bid him good night and tuck the bowl safely near the fire. The aroma is oddly comforting, slightly herbal, possibly beetroot, possibly regret. You snuggle into bed, listening to the soft creaks of your cottage settling, the wind nudging the shutters, and the far-off bleat of a goat committing some kind of misdemeanor. You've survived inspection day, and with only mild judgment, the next few days pass in a gentle rhythm. Rain, mud, oats, occasional goose-related peril. But today, the air feels different, charged with mild purpose. You've been summoned, not in a dramatic, scroll-bearing rider kind of way. No, just a note scratched onto a scrap of bark, left under a rock by your door. Classic local messaging system. It reads, in the Reeves' distinct handwriting, we need more thatchers. Report to the barn. Ah, community service. You sigh. Lace up your least soggy boots and head toward the large barn that serves as the village's semi-official meeting hall, storage space, and, once, inexplicably, a wedding venue for two hedgehogs. Long story. Inside, a small crowd has gathered. The Reeve, looking very pleased with himself, gestures to a pile of dried reeds and a stack of bent tools that look like they've lost several fights with gravity. Roof season, he says. You are now a thatcher's apprentice. Apparently, thatching, you learn quickly, is not just laying bundles of straw on a roof and hoping for the best. It's a very specific process that involves angles, layering, and an unwavering belief that rain is your enemy. Your teacher is a woman named Edith. She's 70 if she's a day, and moves like she's made of bark and determination. She hands you a bundle of straw and a wooden mallet. Start layering. Overlap like you're hiding secrets. You nod, unsure if this is practical advice or metaphorical life coaching. The work is slow. You climb onto a low roof alongside Edith and a boy named Alric who keeps humming tunelessly and smells faintly of onions. Together, you begin. Bundle, press, tie, tap. Bundle, press, tie, tap. It's repetitive, almost meditative, except when Alric drops a tool onto your foot. Twice. The sun climbs higher. You sweat through your tunic, occasionally sipping from a goatskin of lukewarm water flavored faintly with hay. Edith, meanwhile, never stops. She thatches like it's personal. At one point, you try to make conversation. You ask her how long she's been doing this. Since roofs were invented, she says without looking up. Historians still argue about the origins of thatch, whether it developed independently in various regions or was passed along through a series of soggy, straw-sharing cultures. What's clear is that it worked and still does. You break for a midday meal bread, a smear of soft cheese, and a mystery vegetable someone insists is a turnip. You don't ask you ask questions. The second half of the day involves working on the steeper side of the barn roof. Edith gives you a rope. In case you fall, try not to. It's embarrassing. You haul yourself up, straddling a wooden beam like a very nervous squirrel. From up here, you can see the whole village, the winding lanes, crooked cottages, and a horse that appears to be stuck in a bucket. Someone else's problem. Surely. You thatch until your fingers itch, and your back complains, and your arms forget how elbows are supposed to function. But slowly, steadily, a roof takes shape. There's something strangely satisfying about it. Knowing that your hands, yes, your very own hands that once trembled, holding a suspicious cheese, are helping protect someone from the next thunderstorm, or at least from a particularly ambitious drizzle. By late afternoon, Edith declares the job acceptable, which, coming from her, is equivalent to a standing ovation. You climb down carefully, shake out your limbs, and accept a muddy mug of cider from a passing child who offers no explanation and disappears like mist. You sit near the edge of the commons with the rest of the thatching crew. Alric is still humming. Someone is telling a very questionable story about a thatch fire started by an angry goat and a torch. You sip your cider slowly, watching smoke curl from nearby chimneys. The wind rustles the newly laid straw overhead. It's warm, dry, and smells like effort and pride. Later that evening, you return home and soak your sore feet in a bucket. Your knees creak, your shoulders whisper threats. Still, there's a deep, satisfying tiredness settling in. The kind you only earn with honest labor and exposure to the full emotional range of straw. You read a page from your book. Today's sea monster appears to have a monocle and what might be a formal cravat. You approve. Your neighbor knocks again. He's brought stew. Again. I added sage this time, he says proudly. Or maybe moss. You thank him and set it by the hearth. There's comfort in routine, especially edible ones. Before bed, you take one last look at the rooftops of your village. Now dressed in fresh layers of thatch, they glow golden in the moonlight, like slouchy crowns for the homes beneath them. You tuck into bed, every muscle humming, every thought softened by straw and sleep. You won't dream of collapsing roofs tonight. You helped stop that. You wake up with a thatcher's hangover, not from cider, but from crouching in odd angles for 10 hours and using muscles you previously suspected were theoretical. Your hands feel like they've been politely stepped on by a cart horse. Your back sounds like an old floorboard. But, surprisingly, your mood, fairly pleasant. Something about contributing to an actual roof gives you a sliver of self-satisfaction. Also, you smell faintly of straw, very rustic. Today, the village is hosting something that's supposed to lift spirits, the midsummer fair. You pull on your cleanest tunic, still only medium stained, and head toward the village green, where the festivities are already assembling in a delightfully disorganized way. Stalls are half built. The ale cart has arrived early and is parked at an angle that suggests the horse made some decisions. A juggler is arguing with a pig over territory, and the reeve is already sweating. Despite the morning chill, you wander through the chaos with curiosity. There's a sort of sleepy energy in the air, like the village itself is trying its best to be festive, but still needs a nap first. Someone thrusts a string of wilting flowers into your hand and declares you part of the decoration committee. You wear it as a crown. You look like a slightly confused druid. It suits you. The first event is the opening dance, led by Matilda the baker, who insists on doing everything barefoot and with extra spins. You politely decline to participate, claiming thatching injuries. Everyone accepts this as valid. Then comes the sack race. It's wildly competitive. Alric, your thatching partner, somehow hops his way directly into a goose and is immediately disqualified for avian interference. You visit the food stalls next. One offers meat, no further description. Another has pies that are definitely filled with something. And a third serves up sweet oat cakes drizzled with honey and sprinkled with what might be thyme or possibly just crushed leaves. You go for the oat cake. It tastes like childhood and a hint of regret. Perfect. Nearby, children play a game that involves throwing turnips into a barrel. The prize. The same turnips, but with more admiration. One girl hits 3 in a row and is carried around the green on someone's shoulders like a tiny turnip queen. Historians still debate the purpose of such local games. Some argue they reinforced community bonds. Others believe it was mostly boredom mixed with competition and a deep mistrust of turnips. Around midday, there's a storytelling contest. The rules are simple. Tell a tale. Make the crowd chuckle. Don't get pelted with stale bread. You sit among the listeners as an old man recounts the time he accidentally proposed to a knight while sleepwalking. There's a long detour involving sheep costumes and a very understanding innkeeper. You laugh gently, the kind of laugh that doesn't disturb your digestion. Later, the fair enters its most chaotic phase, the raffle. Tickets are distributed haphazardly. Prizes include a dented cauldron, a bag of feathers, and a loaf of bread that's already been partially claimed by ants. You win the feathers. No one is more confused than you. As the sun begins to lower itself toward the horizon, the mood softens. Music starts up a mix of fiddle, drum, and someone doing their best with a wooden flute that sounds suspiciously like a sad duck. Couples dance, children twirl. The air smells of roasting onions, smoke, and a hopeful dash of rosemary. You find yourself by the edge of the green, sitting on a log, sipping cider with a few other weary villagers. Edith is there too, her hands still calloused, her expression serene. Good roof work yesterday, she says without looking at you. You beam. Praise from Edith is as rare as a dry season. She passes you a small bundle. It's a woven charm made from spare thatching straw. Luck. She says simply. You hold it like treasure because it is. The fair continues into the early evening. Someone lights a large fire in the center of the green. People gather around it, throwing in small twigs, flower wreaths, and written wishes on bark. It's part tradition, part catharsis, part excuse to stand near something warm. You toss in a tiny scrap on which you've scribbled, "Please let next winter be mild, and let the goats behave." It flares briefly. The smoke curls upward, carrying your sleepy plea toward whatever deities handle goat-related affairs. As the night deepens, you slowly make your way home, your legs protesting every step, your feather raffle prize under one arm. You pause by your door, look back at the flickering firelight, hear the soft hum of music still drifting through the trees. It's quiet, it's calm, it's enough. Inside, your bed welcomes you like a forgiving hug. You tuck the straw charm under your pillow, just in case it works. And as you drift off, you smile faintly, already halfway to dreaming of dancing turnips and mysterious pies. Morning comes slowly, the kind of slow where even the sun seems unsure if it wants to participate. You stretch beneath your blanket, limbs heavy with midsummer fare leftover cider, laughter, and more oatcake than your stomach strictly needed. Outside, the village is quiet, hungover, perhaps emotionally, if not actually. You roll out of bed and do your usual check toes present, elbows functional, vague sense of existential bewilderment intact. Today's task, as declared by the Reeves' latest bark note, is community cleaning. That's right, it's latrine day. You sigh the way one sighs when they know history will not remember them kindly. Latrines in your village are basic, but functional wooden seats over pits, occasionally treated with ash, straw, and blind optimism. They're shared between households, maintained by rotation, and haunted by the ghost of meals past. You grab a bucket, a shovel, and a scrap of linen to tie over your nose. Let's begin. The first latrine is mercifully shallow. Someone's already begun emptying it. You wave at them. They wave back with a "we've seen things" expression. You shovel, quietly apologizing to the earth itself. There's an art to it. Surprisingly, angle the shovel just so, swing without splatter, and always, always stay upwind. You carry full buckets to the compost heap, where everything gets dumped and covered in straw later. This will become fertile soil for gardens. You don't think about that too hard. One of the other villagers, a red-faced man named Oswin, offers you a turnip as a snack. You decline politely. Something about eating mid-latrine duty just feels morally wrong. Historians still debate how sanitation practices evolved in medieval villages. Some communities had elaborate rules for waste disposal, while others like yours relied on sheer determination and an ability to ignore smell. Midway through your fourth latrine, you pause to stretch. Your back emits a sound like a tired accordion. A chicken walks past, looks into the pit, and seems unimpressed. You start humming to distract yourself. It's the same tune Ulrich uses when thatching. It works surprisingly well. Later, you switch jobs with a woman named Alice, who's been hauling buckets and now seeks a change of scenery, relatively speaking. She hands you a broom and points to the area near the communal well. Slippery with moss, she says. Also, someone spilled fish several days ago. You head to the well, where the smell confirms her statement. The paving stones are slick with greenish growth, and the air is scented with faint regret and pickled herring. You sweep with determination. It's oddly satisfying to see moss fly off in damp curls. You accidentally splash your foot in a mysterious puddle, then pretend it didn't happen. Classic coping strategy. A small boy appears and begins helping by smacking the stones with a stick. You thank him gravely, knight him with your broom, and declare him Sir Stinky of the lower road. He is thrilled. Around midday, You and the other cleaners break for a shared meal in the shade of a barn. You sit on overturned buckets, eating cold barley porridge with honey drizzled over the top. Someone passes a flask of cider. You sip and immediately feel more heroic. Better than war, says Oswin. You all nod. Eventually, you tackle the bathhouse. Now, calling it a bathhouse is generous. It's a wooden shed with a large tub, a hearth, and a system involving buckets, shouted instructions, and the occasional herbal infusion. Still, it's where villagers come to scrub the grime off, especially after thatching or latrines. You help scrub the inside of the tub, relight the fire beneath the water pot, and restock the linen shelf with the least hole-filled towels you can find. There's a simple pleasure in the work. Everything smells of wood smoke, herbs, and soap made from lard and lye. You find yourself smiling despite the ache in your arms. You wash your own hands thoroughly, twice, then splash your face. The cold water jolts you back into yourself. Back outside, the village looks just a bit brighter. Swept paths, cleaned well, less suspicious puddles. You run into Edith again. She nods approvingly. Smells less like doom. She says, "High praise." The day ends with a little gathering near the bread oven. Someone has made flatbreads with herbs. Someone else plays a drum. A child juggles 3 apples and promptly drops them all into a puddle. You sit with your feet stretched out, watching the smoke rise against a soft pink sky. The air hums with the sound of neighbors not doing chores, which is its own kind of music. You think about the fact that cleaning latrines, scrubbing moss, and hauling buckets will never make it into epic poems or grand histories. But here, in this quiet corner of the world, it matters. You helped. You contributed. You made the village just a little less stinky. And tonight, as you climb into bed, your limbs loose and your heart unexpectedly light, you realize something. This may be boring history, but it's your boring history, and you're doing just fine. It's raining, not the dramatic, stormy kind of rain that feels like nature is making a point. No, this is the slow, steady drizzle that medieval England seems to specialize in, the sort that seeps into everything: your boots, your sleeves, your soul. You pull your hood up, though it does little. The fabric, which once might have been somewhat water resistant, now seems to act mostly as a moisture sponge. You've been assigned to accompany the Reeve to the manor house today. A thrilling honor, he said, though his tone suggested you were really just a convenient extra pair of legs. The path up to the manor is a muddy snake of a road, lined with sullen hedges and the occasional very damp goat. You trudge alongside the Reeve, who spends the walk muttering about tallies and tithes and how someone is definitely skimming apples off the communal orchard. The manor looms ahead, not a castle, exactly, but impressive in its own slightly drafty stone barn with windows sort of way. You step through the large wooden doors into a great hall that smells of smoke, wax, and a hint of wet dog. It's warm inside. At least, you're here to deliver the village's seasonal report, harvest expectations, tax records, labor notes. The lord of the manor, a man with eyebrows like angry moss, listens with one eye open, the other perhaps reserving judgment. You stand awkwardly while the Reeve lists debts and grain tallies. You nod supportively at moments that feel significant. The steward, sharp eyed and suspicious, grills you on sheep head counts. You respond confidently with the number you've been told, silently praying it's accurate. For all you know, a few sheep have absconded to Wales. Historians still argue over how much power manor lords actually wielded in daily peasant life. Some claim it was distant oversight at best, while others cite plenty of evidence for micromanagement, especially when wool profits were involved. After the report is finished, you're invited to stay and observe court. It's not glamorous. Peasant court is more petty squabbles and stolen turnips than royal intrigue. A man is accused of brewing ale without a license. Another is scolded for letting his pigs root in someone else's garden. A woman demands repayment for a chicken borrowed indefinitely. You sit on a bench that might be older than logic and do your best to look interested. Eventually, the reeve is dismissed, and you both shuffle back into the rain. To lift your spirits, he offers to stop at the village alehouse. You accept. The alehouse, if you can call it that, is really a slightly larger hut with benches, a smoky hearth, and a woman named Brunhild who serves beer strong enough to question your decisions. You nurse a mug of it slowly, while a small dog curls at your feet and snores. A minstrel begins to play something on a stringed instrument that might once have been a lute, though now it resembles a wounded log. The tune is melancholy and lovely, and thoroughly out of tune. Someone recites a poem badly. You listen, drowsy and damp, to tales of sheep that predict weather and cows that give milk only during full moons. You smile politely at the right moments, even when you're not sure what's happening. You learn that Matilda's niece has invented a new method of keeping bread from going stale by hiding it under her bed. Edith rolls her eyes so hard you hear it. By late afternoon, the rain has lightened to a misty pout. You say your farewells and make your way home through the soggy lanes, your boots squelching with each resigned step. Back at your hut, you hang your cloak by the fire, lay your damp socks near the embers, and breathe in that cozy smell of peat and smoke and something possibly burning, but only a little. You eat a simple dinner of broth and barley, seasoned with a pinch of salt and a lot of imagination. You think back to the manor house, to the way the steward's quill scratched across parchment, to the dog asleep beneath the alehouse bench, to the woman defending her missing chicken like it was a crown jewel. It's all so wonderfully small and yet entirely full. You tuck yourself into bed, listening to the last drips of rain tap against your roof like a soft drum. Another day behind you, nothing dramatic, nothing poem-worthy, but you survived it. And in medieval terms, that's a pretty big win. You wake up to a knock on the door, a slow, deliberate knock, the kind that says this isn't urgent, but it's going to ruin your day anyway. You roll out of bed and creak open the wooden door. It's Edwin, the village messenger. He's got the look of someone who'd rather be anywhere else, which is not comforting. You're on watch duty, he says. The bailiff says it's your turn. You blink. Watch for what? He shrugs. Bandits. Probably. Or wolves. Or maybe just cows that wander into the barley again. Fantastic. Being assigned to village watch sounds vaguely heroic until you realize it mostly involves standing on a small hill with a stick, hoping nothing happens. If something does happen, the expectation is not to engage, It's to run and yell for someone more qualified, like the reeve or a particularly brave goose. You grab your gear, a patched cloak, a walking stick with mild aspirations of being a spear, and a small pouch with 2 chunks of hard cheese. You never know when emergency cheese might come in handy. Your post is just outside the village, on a raised mound by the edge of the woods. From there, you can see the fields, the winding path to the market town, and a suspiciously defiant cow staring at the barley patch again. The wind picks up as you settle onto a log. It's a bit chilly, but the sky is clear. You chew your cheese slowly and try not to imagine bandits with excellent archery skills lurking behind every bush. Historians still argue how common rural raids were in this period. Some records suggest small villages like yours were mostly left alone, while others describe opportunistic attacks by disbanded soldiers, rogue knights, or just desperate men with nothing to lose and a grudge against barley. You spot something moving near the hedgerow. You tense. Is it a thief, a wolf, a shape-shifting monk? Nope, just a hedgehog. It toddles across the path with zero interest in your panic, then disappears into a thicket. You exhale and adjust your seat on the log. It's already going numb. Hours pass. You think about that time a goose took over your laundry for a day and realize that today is only marginally less chaotic. A woman from the next village passes by with a cart full of apples. You exchange polite nods. She offers you one. You accept. It's sweet and crisp and tastes like not dying of boredom. Later, a monk walks by humming a chant under his breath. He blesses you, blesses your stick, and blesses the hedgerow, just in case. You thank him and try not to laugh until he's out of earshot. By mid-afternoon, the sun hangs low and golden, casting long shadows across the fields. You watch a flock of birds swoop in synchronized patterns. It's hypnotic, really, like nature's way of saying, don't fall asleep. But also, wouldn't it be lovely if you did? You hum to yourself. A few children sneak out to bring you a warm crust of bread and some dried apples. They call it a watch snack and flee giggling into the wheat. You remember standing watch as a kid when the only real danger was bees and sunburn. It felt important then. It still does, even if nothing happens. Someone has to be there to see the nothing. You spot a figure in the distance, someone unfamiliar, with a wide-brimmed hat and a large bundle strapped to their back. You squint. They approach slowly, waving a white cloth. You call down to the Reeves house, just in case. Turns out it's a traveling merchant. He's lost, possibly tipsy, and mostly interested in selling buttons and goose feathers. You offer him a direction. He offers you a button shaped like a fish. You accept. It's oddly charming as the sky turns dusky and purple. Your replacement finally arrives, young Emma, who once tried to catch fog in a jar and sell it as a miracle cure. She's cheerful, damp, and armed with a fork. You brief her on the merchant, the cow, and the hedgehog. She nods seriously. You trade spots and head home. Your legs ache, your nose is cold, and you still smell faintly of damp log. But you did it. You watched. You waited. You kept the village safe, or at least observed it very gently. And tomorrow, someone else gets the stick and the cheese pouch. You hang your cloak by the hearth, slip into your warmest tunic, and sit by the fire with the fish shaped button in your hand. It's nothing and everything, just another page in your very boring, very noble medieval life. You wake up to something magical. No, not a vision or a prophecy, just the smell of fresh bread. And in medieval terms, that's about as close as it gets to divine intervention. You sit up, stretch, and sniff the air again. There it is, warm, nutty, slightly smoky. Bread day. You pull on your tunic and rush outside. It's early, but not too early. The sun is just rising, casting a golden glow on the thatched rooftops. Dew sparkles on the grass like the village has been sprinkled with tiny, sleepy diamonds. At the heart of it all is the bakehouse, a communal structure, squat and stone built, with a thick chimney puffing out lazy curls of flower-scented smoke. A small crowd has already gathered, baskets in hand, gossip on tongues. Today, it's your turn to bake. Well, not alone, you've been paired with Agnes, a stern woman with forearms carved from granite and zero tolerance for burnt crusts. She nods at you, hands you a lump of dough, and points to the bench like a military officer assigning a battlefield position. You start kneading. It's strangely satisfying, soft, rhythmic, almost meditative. Your fingers work the dough with increasing confidence. Though Agnes critiques your technique every few minutes, more wrist, less elbow. No, not like that. Inside the bakehouse, the oven, a dome-shaped monster of cob and brick, is already roaring. A fire has been burning since dawn, and the air inside is deliciously warm in winter. It doubles as a social hub. In summer, it's a sweaty proof of endurance. You line up your loaves beside others on a long wooden peel. Some are round and rustic, others more carefully braided, infused with honey, or topped with mysterious seeds you didn't ask too many questions about. Historians still argue whether medieval village bakehouses were egalitarian community centers or tools of lordly control. Some accounts describe shared resources and fair schedules, while others suggest heavy taxes, uneven access, and political battles over oven time. Your batch goes in. Now comes the best part, waiting. Agnes lets you sit by the fire and, perhaps out of pity, or perhaps to prevent you from messing anything else up, offers you a cup of small beer. It's warm, sour, and vaguely fizzy. You drink it gratefully. The conversation among the others flows freely. Bread is only half the reason to be here. You hear news from a nearby abbey where someone apparently saw a chicken lay 2 eggs at once. There is much debate over whether this is a miracle or just a poultry fluke. Eldred tells a story about the time the oven chimney clogged and smoke poured into the vicar's loft. The vicar, believing it a sign of hellfire, tried to bless the entire village using nothing but damp lettuce. You laugh, a little too loudly. Agnes glares. You check your loaves, tapping one with the practiced knock of someone who knows what hollow sounds like. Not quite yet. While you wait, you help sweep flour, shape the next batch of dough, and awkwardly avoid eye contact with the baker's cat, who seems to have a personal vendetta against your shins. Finally, your bread is ready, slightly misshapen, a little unevenly browned, but done. And yours, Agnes approves with a grunt, which in her language is a standing ovation. You wrap the loaf in cloth and cradle it like a newborn. It smells amazing. You swear you can feel its warmth through the cloth, a comforting weight against your chest. On your way back home, you stop at Edith's stall and trade half the loaf for a wedge of soft cheese and a handful of dried herbs, a fair deal, and one that ensures your dinner will be notably less bland than usual. You pass a group of children pretending to be knights fighting a dragon that's clearly just a large turnip on a stick. You offer them a crust. The knight accepts it solemnly, declaring it bread of courage. You try not to cry from pride. Back in your hut, you slice into the loaf while it's still steaming. The crust crackles. The inside is tender, chewy, and rich with the earthy flavor of rye and a whisper of smoke. You smear it with cheese, sprinkle it with the herbs, and take a bite. It's perfect. Better than perfect. It's edible. You sit by the fire, chewing slowly, watching the flicker of flame on the stone walls. Outside, the village moves on. Chickens squawk. A pig escapes. Someone yells something about socks being stolen from the riverbank again. But inside, you have bread, your bread, and for a moment, that's all you need. You don't mean to get roped into it. One moment, you're peacefully trimming the hedges outside your hut. The next, the village steward is waving a scroll in your face and declaring that it's your turn to help repair the road. Not just any road, of course, the road. The stretch that leads from the village gate to the nearby stream, the one that's been muddy, lopsided, and mildly cursed since the reign of some minor baron whose name no one remembers, but whose poor planning lives on. You sigh and grab your tools, a wooden spade, a pick that's mostly handle, and a cart with one wheel that believes in free will. It's not glamorous work, this road mending. But then again, what is? You arrive to find three others already there: old Wulfric, who supervises more than he shovels; Ellen, who hums while she works and is twice as fast as everyone else; and Finn, who once tried to fix a roof with cheese and is now, understandably, not trusted with decisions. You greet them and join in, digging a trench to drain the puddle that's grown large enough to qualify for its own tax status. The mud clings to your boots like it has abandonment issues. Historian debates continue over how often medieval roads were actually repaired by locals. Some records suggest regular labor duties tied to land ownership, while others describe the roads as good enough if the ox doesn't sink entirely. You shovel, you level, you scatter gravel that's definitely just colorful rocks from the riverbank. A passing peddler complains about the dust, then the mud, then the rocks. You smile politely and imagine inventing a time machine just to avoid his entire existence. By midday, you break for a meal. Ellen shares a pie filled with something suspiciously green. You share your last heel of bread. Finn reveals a road patching potion, which turns out to be water with sage in it. Work resumes. You argue gently over the best angle for a ditch. Old Wulfric insists ditches must point sunwise. No one's sure what that means, but he's very confident about it. So you go along. You lift stones, you pat down earth, you wonder why your elbow has developed a clicking sound. As the afternoon wears on, children come to watch. One offers to help, wielding a small stick like a ceremonial hoe. You thank them, give them a smooth pebble for effort, and politely redirect them toward the less dangerous task of yelling at geese. A farmer's cart rolls by and actually makes it across the road without tipping sideways or getting stuck. You cheer. He waves. It feels like a parade. Then it rains, not a thunderstorm, just a gentle drizzle, but enough to undo most of your neatest patches. You all stare at the fresh rivulets carving paths through your handiwork. Finn quietly puts his sage water on a puddle and mutters something. It doesn't work, unless the goal was to offend the mud. You push through in medieval life. Giving up isn't an option unless you want the Reeve to assign you something even worse, like latrine duty, so you keep shoveling. Eventually, you finish, well, it's flatter, mostly, and not actively trapping livestock anymore. You look down the road. It may not be perfect, but it's a step up from a swampy memory of a path. A little gravel, a little ditch, a little stubborn hope. You wipe your hands on your tunic, which now resembles an abstract painting titled Brown in Various Tones. Ellen pats your shoulder. Wulfric declares it passable with enthusiasm. Even Finn looks pleased. You walk back to the village slowly, sore in places you didn't know had muscles. As you pass the baker's hut, someone calls out and tosses you a scrap of warm crust. You catch it with the reflexes of a person highly motivated by carbohydrates. You sit on the low stone wall near your home and nibble the bread, watching as a pair of oxen amble peacefully down your newly repaired road. They don't sink, they don't trip, they just walk. You grin. Small victories. In a world of muddy chaos and too much goose drama, a solid road is something to be proud of, even if it'll need patching again next week. You were warned. When you first arrived in the village, someone mentioned it in passing. Watch out for market day. It's a lot. You'd smiled, thinking, how bad could it be? Some sheep, a few turnips, maybe a man selling slightly cursed wooden spoons. But now, standing at the edge of the village green, you understand. It is a lot. Every sense is under siege. Bells clang, chickens shriek, children dart between stalls like greased eels, and a man appears to be loudly auctioning off a goose with one eye in a suspicious attitude. You take a breath. Market day in a medieval village isn't just a weekly chore. It's an event, a social feast, a chance to trade goods, share news, find a lost sock, and pick up lice all in one glorious outing. You step forward into the chaos. The first stall you see is selling eels, just piles of them, slippery, sullen, slightly judgy eels. You nod respectfully and keep walking. Next, a table of woven baskets. The seller, a wiry woman named Mab, assures you that one of them can hold a screaming pig and still keep its shape. You're not in the market for pig containment, but you admire the craftsmanship. You move on. A juggler is attempting to entertain a crowd using 3 turnips and a bit of song. His voice is nasal, his rhythm questionable, but the turnips are holding steady. Historians still argue whether medieval markets were primarily trade centers or more about gathering gossip and asserting status. Written records often focus on transactions, but diaries and local anecdotes suggest that the true currency was who saw whom buying what and who they were standing a little too close to. You finally reach your goal, the food stalls. A hunched man offers pies of unknown origin, You eye one warily. What's in this, you ask? Mostly pigeon, maybe some honesty. He replies, winking. You decide to pass. Instead, you find a vendor selling fresh pears, real fruit, slightly bruised but gloriously golden. You trade a scrap of cloth and a polished rock for two. You munch one slowly, savoring the gritty sweetness. A wasp hovers. You wave it away like a lazy sorcerer. Nearby, a group of musicians begins playing something jaunty on pipes and drums. Children start a circle dance that rapidly devolves into enthusiastic stomping and much tripping over tunics. You buy a carved whistle from a boy who insists it's guaranteed to summon helpful birds. You test it later and summon only a sleepy duck. Still, not bad. The afternoon passes in a pleasant fog of mild haggling, gentle people watching, and acquiring things you definitely don't need a lump of lavender soap, a candle shaped like a monk, and a single glove with a painted smiley face. You help an older woman carry her bundle of turnips, and she thanks you with a crooked tooth grin and a pinch of your cheek that implies you might be on the short list for her granddaughter. As you weave back toward home, you pass a booth selling protection charms. The vendor gestures dramatically to a pile of twigs, claiming one warded off a wolf last month. You raise an eyebrow and continue on, feeling reasonably confident that your personality alone is enough to scare most predators. Back at your hut, you spread out your purchases on the table like a dragon admiring its treasure hoard: pear core, bird whistle, weird soap, mysterious candle, solitary glove, your wealth medieval style. You lie back on your straw mattress and close your eyes, the distant sounds of market cleanup still echoing the clatter of carts, the thump of barrels, the eternal argument over whether that goat was paid for or stolen with flair. You smile, tired but content. In the grand scale of history, market days don't often make headlines. But for ordinary villagers like you, they're a lifeline, a chance to connect, laugh, trade, and remember you're not just a cog in the feudal wheel. You're a person, one with a pear sticky hand and a whistle that summons ducks. You wake before dawn, your back protesting from the previous day's market haul, but today is no day for sleeping in. It's feast day, not one of those grand royal affairs with roast peacocks and dancing minstrels on stilts. No, this is a village feast, the kind built on lentils, borrowed herbs, and the collective hope that someone managed to catch a rabbit. Outside, the green is already a flurry of preparation. Smoke rises from low fires. Children are tasked with running errands, gathering eggs, and not falling into anything boiling. You join in, sleeves rolled up, eyes still half shut. First, there's chopping. Endless chopping. Roots and tubers, mostly turnips, leeks, and a few knobby things no one's sure are edible, but everyone's too polite to say so. Your knife isn't sharp, but you pretend it is. Like everyone else, sawing rhythmically while gossip floats around like flour in the air. Did you hear about that cow that swam across the stream? Someone asks, looking for love. They say. You nod sagely. It's feast day. Even the cows have romantic aspirations. You're handed a bowl and instructed to stir a pot large enough to lose a child in. It smells of onions, garlic, and distant hope. You stir dutifully, sweating slightly, until someone relieves you and you escape into the slightly less chaotic outdoors. There, others are setting up long, rough plank tables. No tablecloths, just clean rushes laid across the wood, which will do double duty catching spills and acting as a post feast snack for opportunistic geese. Historians debate how common village feasts were and whether they were more religious obligation or social glue. Some records suggest elaborate preparations. Others describe feast days as glorified potlucks, where everyone brought their best effort and prayed someone else brought bread. You help carry a cask of ale. It's heavy, wooden, and suspiciously damp. You imagine it's leaked all the way from the brewer's cottage, leaving a boozy breadcrumb trail behind. By midday, the air is thick with aromas roasting barley, stewed greens, singed bread crust. You sample a spiced porridge that tastes like it's trying very hard to be exciting. You smile and nod anyway. Then come the performances. An old man sings a love ballad that may or may not be about a sheep. A girl recites a poem from memory and is rewarded with enthusiastic clapping and a slightly underripe plum. A boy attempts juggling, 2 eggs and a rock. The result is mixed. You laugh until your stomach hurts, not from the performances, but from the sense of shared absurdity. Everyone's trying, everyone's here. At last, the food is served. There are no courses, no fancy dishes. Everything is piled on mismatched platters, loaves of flat bread, a few roast birds, a blessedly large pot of stew. You find a seat, squeeze in beside someone's great aunt, and dig in. The bread is chewy, the stew is hearty, the ale is stronger than expected. You lean back, full and warm and only slightly worried that you'll be asked to dance. Too late. The fiddler starts up a tune, a fast, looping rhythm that draws clapping from the crowd and groans from the recently fed. You're pulled up, gently but firmly, into a ring of spinning bodies. You stomp, you sway, you nearly collide with a goat that's wandered into the mix. It's clumsy, it's joyful, it's exactly enough. The dancing fades as the sun dips low. Torches are lit, casting everything in soft amber light. Children fall asleep on hay bales. Someone starts telling a story about the time the priest got stuck in a well. Everyone leans in. You listen, eyes half closed, the flames flickering across faces you've come to know. This is your village, your people. You may not own land or ride horses or wear fur-trimmed cloaks, but on feast day, you eat like royalty, laugh like you've never known sorrow, and fall asleep with the knowledge that, for tonight, everything is enough. Even the stew. You wake up in your clothes, smelling faintly of stew, grass, and whatever ale-soaked decisions you made near the bonfire. A piece of bread is tucked under your elbow like a very dry pillow. Feast day may be over, but its echoes linger in the form of a mild headache and crumbs in your hair. Still, there's no time for lounging. Today is laundry day. Laundry, in your medieval world, is not a quiet, solo affair with scented detergent and a gentle spin cycle. It is a full body, multi-step, surprisingly loud operation that involves fire, cold water, and a great deal of hitting things with sticks. You gather your bundle of clothes, mostly brown, all vaguely stiff and head to the communal washing area near the stream. Several others are already there, sleeves rolled up, faces grim with detergentless determination. You set down your pile, find a decent sized flat stone, and begin. There is no soap in the modern sense. Instead, you're working with ash lye, a mixture of water and the fine white powder left from wood fires. It's basic, caustic, and smells like a damp fireplace married a frog. Still, it gets the grime out, mostly. You dunk a tunic in the stream, slosh it around, and then slap it vigorously against the rock. This is considered both cleansing and therapeutic. You slap again, harder this time, pretending the tunic once belonged to your neighbor who borrowed your rake and never returned it. Others around you are deep in similar catharsis. There's Mab, aggressively wringing out socks while muttering about men who don't lift a finger, and old Ralph, who may or may not know his own clothes are inside out. No one corrects him. He's happy. Laundry day is more than domestic labor. It's social commentary. You share complaints. The chickens are nesting in my woodpile again. You share questions. Do you think the priest actually knows Latin? You even share gossip. They say Edith's baby has hair redder than the devil's backside. Wonder who the father really is. Historians still argue how often medieval people washed their clothes and themselves. Bathing had a complicated reputation, encouraged in some eras, discouraged in others, and always subject to regional quirks. But laundry, that had to happen eventually. Lice have no mercy. You pause to stretch your back, arms sore from hours of scrubbing and twisting. A child runs past with what appears to be your sock on their head. You sigh and let it go. It might come back cleaner. Lunch today is simple cold porridge and a turnip that's trying to sprout. You eat it sitting on a rock, shoes drying beside you, feet in the stream. The water is cold, but it numbs your blisters. You think, as you chew, about how much effort goes into simply not smelling bad in your world. No perfumed sprays, no laundry baskets, no dry cleaners to erase wine stains and regret. Just you, a rock, and the relentless force of ash lye. A duck watches you work, judging, perhaps, or offering moral support. It's hard to tell with ducks. As the sun moves lower, you rinse your final garment, a linen shift that used to be white, and lay it on the hedge to dry. The hedge has become a communal clothesline. It looks like a parade of exhausted ghosts. You wring out your cloths, slap your thighs dry, and smile. You may not smell like roses, but you smell like effort, like someone who tried. You gather your now damp bundle, nod farewell to the duck, and begin the trudge home. There's satisfaction in the simplicity, in knowing that your hands did something today, something necessary, something real. Back in your hut, you hang the not yet dry garments near the fire, letting the smoky heat finish what the sun started. Then you sink onto your straw pallet, exhausted but clean enough by medieval standards. You close your eyes, thinking of nothing in particular, except maybe that sock, the one still missing. The morning brings drizzle of fine mist that clings to your face and settles into your cloak like it's trying to move in. You sigh and wrap yourself tighter, because today is pig herding day. Now, pig herding may sound quaint, almost endearing. You might imagine adorable snorting beasts trotting obediently along a lane. You would be wrong. Your pigs are not adorable. They are stubborn, slightly feral, and clever in the way that makes you nervous. They're also vital, providing meat, fat for candles, and the occasional misplaced toe injury when startled. You arrive at the common pasture, a stretch of scrubby woodland on the village edge. It's muddy, root riddled, and contains exactly the right mix of danger and mushrooms. The pigs are already rooting around like they own the place. Go on, then, mutters the swineherd as he hands you a long stick. Just follow 'em. Excellent. A foolproof plan. You begin your day trailing your portion of the village's pig collective, poking at the ground, clucking your tongue, and occasionally shouting something nonsensical like, "Hup," or "That's not your tree." Your pigs, naturally, ignore you. They sniff out acorns, mushrooms, the occasional unlucky beetle, and very nearly someone's dropped shoe. You chase them back from a particularly marshy patch, only to realize you've stepped directly into it. Your boot stays behind in protest. While wrestling it free, you learn that one of your pigs has discovered a wasp nest. It's fine. Mostly, historians still debate the exact methods of medieval pig keeping, whether more pigs were tethered, penned, or allowed to forage semi-wild, but the practice of pannage letting pigs roam forests to fatten up on fallen nuts was widespread and highly valued. It was seasonal, competitive, and often came with rules and fees set by lords who hadn't seen a pig in years. Your pigs show no regard for these rules. They push deeper into the woods. You follow, muttering threats you can't back up and trying not to fall on your face. The woods are dim, the ground uneven, and everything smells like damp fur and moss. You pause at a clearing, squinting. One pig has disappeared behind a log. You investigate, nervous. It's fine. It's just sleeping. On your cloak. You'll get it back later. You sit down for a moment, catching your breath. It's oddly peaceful out here. Birds call to each other. A squirrel scolds you from above. You're filthy, damp, and smelling increasingly like pig. And yet, the quiet is welcome. A fellow herder passes by on the trail, nodding. Lost mine already. He shrugs. Figured they'll come back when they're bored. You nod in solidarity. Pigs are basically cats with hooves. Later, as the sky begins to darken, you finally coax your pigs toward home with a few crusts of bread and the most persuasive grunting noises you can muster. It's not elegant, but it works. Mostly, one pig keeps stopping to examine rocks. You let it. Back at the pen, you corral the herd inside, close the gate, and breathe the biggest sigh of your life. Your cloak is shredded, your boots squelch, but you've survived another day as pig whisperer to the least cooperative creatures in the village. You wipe your hands on your tunic. It doesn't help. The pigs grunt their indifference. You whisper a soft threat, just in case they understand. Then, with mud on your cheeks and straw in your hair, you head home. You won't eat pork tonight. Those pigs are still months from the table, but you'll dream of bacon anyway. Even if it smells vaguely like mushrooms, there's a familiar knock on your crooked wooden door, 3 dull thuds, and a grunt. That's the village messenger. You know what that means. You've been volunteered. Today, you're going to church, but not just to attend. No, you're helping prepare for a holy feast day. You tug on your least dirty cloak and trudge out, wondering how close to pious one has to be to qualify as helpful. You decide mildly clean and not drunk will do. The church is a squat stone building that smells of candle wax, mildew, and mild fear. It's the village's spiritual center, social notice board, and occasional storm shelter. Today, it's also full of nervous villagers attempting to decorate things. You're handed a broom that looks older than your grandmother and pointed toward the nave. The sweeping begins. Church cleaning is an exercise in humility. The straw floor makes sweeping more of a light shuffling experience. There's soot on every surface and mystery stains that defy both prayer and scrubbing. You work beside Marjorie, who seems to be leading the operation via a mixture of divine purpose and stubborn gossip. Move the table closer to the altar. She mutters. Last time it wobbled so bad the priest spilled holy water on his own foot. You obey. You do not wish to anger Marjorie. Historians still debate how involved everyday villagers were in church preparation, but many records, especially in England and France, note local participation in feast days and seasonal celebrations. The line between sacred ritual and community event was blurred. Today, it still is. You help string garlands made of dried flowers and herbs, mostly to mask the odor of sheep tallow candles. Someone attempts to carve a fish symbol into bread. It looks like a fat slug, but everyone claps anyway. Later, you're tasked with polishing the chalice. This involves a rough cloth, much elbow grease, and the quiet suspicion that it's actually pewter and not silver at all. Still, you nod solemnly and whisper something vaguely reverent. It's the effort that counts. Then comes the music rehearsal. You did not sign up for this, but the local musician, Tom, who owns 2 teeth and 1 lute, insists everyone try a verse of the Latin chant. You hum quietly and hope no one notices your Ave sounds more like a child drops the offering plate. A chicken walks through the doorway. Tom forgets the second chord. It's perfect. You take a break by the door, leaning against the stone wall. You're tired. Sure. But there's a gentle buzz in the air, the low hum of preparation, of old songs hummed in shaky harmony, of wax drips and soft footsteps. It's oddly soothing. Outside, someone's put up a carved wooden saint. It looks more like a surprised turnip, but everyone agrees it has holy energy. You bless it with a nod. As dusk settles in, the final candles are placed, and the sanctuary begins to glow. It's imperfect. It's a little smoky, but it's real. And somehow, even without fully understanding the chants or the significance of all the relics, you feel a strange calm in your chest, like the day mattered. You slip out quietly, your hands still faintly sticky with wax. On the way home, you pass 2 children singing the Latin verses with the enthusiasm of people who know none of the words. You hum along, and back in your hut, you light a single candle, not for piety, maybe, but for peace. Your stomach growls, not the polite kind that suggests lunch is late, but the long, echoing grumble that says you've made a terrible mistake by not eating that weird root yesterday. It's market day, and your only hope for variety beyond porridge and pickled everything. You step out into the morning fog, pouch of coins tied securely under your tunic, 3 pennies, a bent farthing, and what may or may not be a game token from last year's midsummer fair. Still, it's currency enough in a place where barter thrives, and trust is half the transaction. The village green has transformed into a muddy festival of trade carts creak, chickens squawk, and someone is already loudly selling eel pies. You wrinkle your nose. Eel for breakfast is a bold move. You move through the crowd, trying not to step in anything tragic. The stalls are chaotic and somehow charming. One table offers apples with exactly 3 wormholes each. Another boasts linen so fine it's only partially itchy. You try not to look interested. A trader with an impressive mustache waves you over to his pottery collection, lopsided jugs, cracked bowls, and one ceramic goose. You ask if it's useful. He shrugs. It's heavy. Fair point. Market day is more than food and trade. It's a full-blown event. Gossip circulates like wind. A sheep went missing. Someone swears they saw a comet, and Marjorie may be courting the cooper's brother, who has both eyebrows and his own ox. You stop at a spice seller's cloth, intrigued by a tiny pile of something reddish, imported from Venice. She says, probably. It smells of dreams and also dirt. You buy a pinch. Who knows when you'll see it again? Historians still argue how common exotic goods were in rural villages: cloves, pepper, saffron, but even trace amounts filtered down from trade routes, especially after fairs or near ports. Most villagers relied on local produce, but every now and then, a whiff of far-off lands appeared in their stew. You trade a handful of eggs for a small wedge of cheese. It's harder than you expected, but cheese is cheese. You take a triumphant bite and nearly chip a tooth. Still worth it. Down the lane, performers begin to gather. One juggles wooden apples. Another plays a tune so shrill it could summon field mice. Children laugh. A pig escapes. Brief chaos ensues, but the juggler catches the pig's leash mid-toss. Applause follows. You find yourself at the cloth seller's booth, fingers grazing fabrics rougher than anything you've worn in months. Then you see it deep blue wool, dyed with woad, rare and far beyond your coin pouch. Still, you stroke it longingly. The seller winks. Maybe next harvest. A dog snatches a sausage and flees. Everyone cheers. As the sun rises higher, the crowd thickens, and so does the scent sweat. Herbs, smoke, and a faint trace of cider. You drink from a shared ladle and try not to think about whose lips touched it last. You tell yourself the heat kills everything. Probably. You leave the market with a few small items in your pouch. Hard cheese, a crumbly candle, and a single dried plum. Not much, but it feels like treasure. On the way home, you pass the road marker carved with a crude face and ancient runes. You touch it lightly for luck, as always. Back in your hut, you unpack your loot. The cheese goes by the hearth, the plum in your pocket for later. You place the mysterious reddish spice on the shelf, imagining for just a moment you are a cook in a bustling tavern, not someone who once mistook moss for lettuce. You settle in. You survived market day. Your coins are gone, but your belly's full enough and your world feels just a little bigger. It's pouring rain again. Not the soft, poetic drizzle of yesterday, but the full-throated, roof thrashing kind that soaks through wool and dignity alike. You were supposed to help mend a fence today, but instead, you're stuck inside with a drafty ceiling and a smoldering fire that smells faintly of cabbage. You're not alone. The neighbor's two children, their mother, and one elderly relative who may or may not be a retired blacksmith have all crammed into your small space for warmth and shared chores. You didn't exactly invite them, but they brought soup, and the children are already asleep in your hay pile. So, fair trade. Today, your job is spinning, specifically using a drop spindle to turn a tuft of wool into something vaguely string like. You've done this before. You were not good at it. The spindle dangles from your fingers, a weighted stick twisting in slow motion. You carefully draft out the wool fibers, trying not to tangle them, or drop the spindle, or impale the chicken. Who has taken a personal interest in your efforts? Spinning was an everyday activity in medieval homes. Everyone did it: men, women, children, whenever their hands weren't otherwise occupied. You could spin while walking, talking, even supervising pigs. The phrase the distaff side refers to women's historical association with spinning, but despite its reputation for tedium, it was also essential. Without it, there were no clothes, no ropes, no nets, just a lot of sheep and very cold people. You finally get a rhythm going. Spin, pinch, draft, wind. It's oddly meditative. Once you stop fighting the process, the soft thunk of the spindle touching the floor is strangely satisfying. The fire crackles. The elderly guest begins humming a tune that might be a hymn or just a memory. Historians still argue about the role of domestic textile work in the broader economy. Some believe spinning and weaving were largely household affairs. Others argue that it formed a quiet but massive part of the rural economy, unofficial, unrecorded, and largely female driven. Either way, the thread in your hand is power, even if it's a little lumpy. The woman across from you is carding wool, pulling it into soft tufts with two wooden paddles covered in metal teeth. She chats as she works, mostly about her son's foot infection and how the new priest doesn't pronounce amen right. You nod and pretend to know what's wrong with his vowels. The children wake briefly, ask for bread, and fall asleep again with alarming efficiency. The chicken remains in your lap, preening like it owns the place. You accept this. As the rain intensifies, you all move closer to the fire. Someone tells a story, something about a cow, a ghost, and a very unfortunate bucket. It makes little sense, but everyone laughs in the right places. Later, the neighbor produces a scrap of cloth dyed with onion skins. It's an uneven yellow-orange, the kind of color that makes you think of squashes and sour cider. You love it. She offers to trade for one of your fire-blackened spoons. Done. You spin more. Your fingers begin to remember. The wool runs smoother, the spindle steadier, the rhythm wraps around you like the rain constant. Steady, soft. Outside, the storm rages. Inside, the fire warms your toes. The air smells of damp wool and barley stew, and for once, no one expects you to lift anything heavier than a spindle. You glance at the uneven thread wound around the shaft. It's ugly. It's perfect. You made it. The storm can do its worst. You'll keep spinning. The storm is past, leaving behind a soft hush and mud so thick it tries to eat your shoes. You squelch through the morning light, following the winding trail toward your neighbor's mill. Today, you're helping grind grain because bread doesn't bake itself and flour doesn't fall from the sky, no matter how much you pray for miracles. The mill is a squat, wooden structure perched beside a sluggish stream. A wooden wheel turns lazily in the current, dripping water and promise. You can hear the rumble of stone on stone before you even reach the door. Inside, the air is a symphony of dust, creaking wood, and the endless circular groan of the millstones. The miller greets you with a nod and a face that suggests he's been awake since the Dark Ages. He gestures toward a sack of barley and says, "Get hauling." You do not enjoy hauling. Still, you lug the sack to the hopper, basically a large wooden funnel, and tip it slowly. The grain trickles into the center, disappearing between two massive stones that spin so closely together they could shave the eyebrows off a fly. Grinding is slow work, but it's rhythmic. The stones crush the barley into rough flour, which spills out in a soft, pale heap that smells faintly sweet. You're handed a flat wooden scoop and told to keep it from clumping like a cow's backside. You nod wisely. You have no idea what that means. Medieval mills were marvels of low-speed engineering. Water mills date back to Roman times. But by the medieval period, they were the center of many village economies. Monasteries, lords, and towns all jockeyed for mill rights, which came with fees, maintenance duties, and frequent squabbles about who stole whose wheel grease. Historians still argue whether peasants got fair access to milling, or if lords exploited them with mandatory usage fees. You don't know the politics, but you do know the miller expects a share of your flour, your patience, and probably your lunch. You take a break by the open window, coughing dust and watching ducks chase each other in the stream. For a moment, the steady thrum of the wheel feels like a lullaby. The flour clings to your eyelashes. You lick your lips. They taste like grain and grit when the miller isn't looking. You draw a rude face in the flour pile. It's childish. It's also oddly satisfying. Next comes sieving, the art of shaking a wide wooden frame full of flour to remove the husks. You take your post and shake gently. A cloud of fine powder erupts and instantly coats your hair, your sleeves, and quite possibly your soul. You sneeze loud enough to startle the ducks. Your neighbor arrives to collect his flour. He nods at you, notes your ghost-like appearance, and asks if you're now part of the afterlife. You reply with a snort and a handful of flour to his shoulder. Work halts for lunch. You eat bread, naturally coarse, dark, slightly sour. Someone has dried pears, and you almost cry with joy. You trade 2 sneezes and a compliment for 1 slice. By late afternoon, your muscles ache, your arms are sore, and you've developed a deep personal relationship with barley dust. But the flour is done, bagged, and ready for baking. You head home, sack on your back, leaving a pale trail behind you like a tired ghost. At your door, the chicken regards you warily. You probably look edible. Inside, you drop the flour by the hearth and collapse onto your stool. There's something immensely satisfying about a full flour sack, even if it came at the cost of your shoulders. You brush white streaks off your tunic. You fail. You are now part flour. Still, tomorrow promises baking, bread, warmth, purpose. You smile faintly. You made this, literally. Your arms still ache from yesterday's flour hauling adventures, but the scent of rising dough draws you from your straw pile like a moth to candlelight. Today, it's baking day, and as it turns out, that's not quite as cozy as it sounds. The fire has already been lit in the clay bread oven, an igloo-shaped dome tucked beside your hearth. You had to preheat it with bundles of kindling and wood scraps, which means you spent the last hour stoking flames and nervously watching for smoke signals. Now, with the coals raked out and the heat lingering in the stone, it's finally time to get the loaves in. You eye your dough, which you mixed with barley flour, water, and a mysterious sour lump from last week that everyone swears is good starter. It has bubbled ominously overnight, occasionally sighing like an old man in a rainstorm. That's how you know it's ready. You punch it down gently, like you're apologizing in advance, and begin shaping rough round loaves. They don't look like anything from a modern bakery window, more like small helmets. Still, they'll do. Each loaf is marked with a simple slash on top, partly to let steam escape, partly to show they're yours. In medieval towns, communal ovens meant that everyone brought their dough to one place to bake. People marked their loaves with initials, patterns, or sometimes just poked them with a special stick. Historians still argue whether this system encouraged community sharing or low-level loaf theft. You slide your loaves into the oven with a long, flat paddle called a peel. It's awkward. You nearly lose one to the ash pile, but manage to rescue it with a move that could only be described as culinary jousting. Then you wait. There's no timer, no temperature dial, just instinct, smell, and the occasional brow-singeing peek through the oven door. While you wait, you tidy the space, feed the chicken, and hum the half-forgotten milling song the old man sang yesterday. Eventually, the smell starts to change from raw grain and starter tang to warm crust, toasted husk, and the sweet, earthy comfort of real bread. You feel a strange pride, like you've tamed something wild and useful. You slide the loaves out carefully. They're imperfect, cracked in odd places, a little lopsided. One might have fused slightly to the oven wall, but they're real and hot and yours. You knock the bottoms and listen for the hollow thump that says done. The sound echoes in your chest. There's something ancient about it, this ritual of turning grain to dough, dough to bread, and bread into survival. Bread was the backbone of the medieval diet. In lean seasons, it could be the only thing people ate. Some loaves were mixed with ground peas or acorns to stretch the flour. Others were baked in pans lined with bran or leaves. A really fancy loaf might include milk or eggs, though you haven't seen either in weeks. You break open the first loaf. Steam escapes, curling like a tiny spirit rising to heaven. You tear off a chunk, blow gently, and bite. It's dense, slightly chewy, tastes faintly of sourness and triumph. Your neighbor stops by. Drawn by the smell, you offer a piece. He chews slowly and nods like you've passed a sacred test. The rest of the loaves cool on a rough wooden board. One is earmarked for a trade. Another will be saved for stew dipping. One is going to the family next door because they helped you dig out the latrine last week. True friendship. Honestly, you wrap the last one in a scrap of cloth and tuck it away, imagining the comfort of eating it late tonight. When the wind howls and the fire dies low, baking bread isn't glamorous. It doesn't earn you praise or riches, but it gives you something deeply rare in this age: certainty, warmth, a full stomach, a task with a reward. The chicken pecks curiously at a fallen crumb. You eye it warily. You've worked too hard to share. Let the storm winds blow. Let the miller grumble. Let the church bells toll. You have bread. And that, here, is as close to winning as anyone gets. You're sitting on your doorstep now, a hunk of bread in one hand and a wooden mug of thin ale in the other. The sky is smeared with gray-blue clouds, and the late afternoon air smells like damp wood and something faintly herbal. Maybe your neighbor's trying to make soap again. You decide not to ask. It's a rare moment of peace, and for once, nobody's asking you to dig, fetch, haul, or explain why your chicken keeps sneaking into the priest's herb garden. You chew slowly. Your jaw aches slightly from the dense bread, but it's warm and satisfying, and honestly, chewing is the only exercise you enjoy. You glance up the road and see a familiar figure lurching toward you. It's old Wymond, the village messenger. He walks like a man who's fought gravity and lost. His clothes look slept in, and his hat appears to be hosting moss. He waves a crumpled bit of parchment and wheezes. Proclamation. You sigh. It's never good when something's official. Turns out, the local lord is planning a new tax. Something about road repairs, or maybe bridge maintenance, or possibly to fund another statue of himself holding a slightly larger sword. No one's quite sure, but what is sure is that you'll be giving up a few more coins, or possibly more flour. Taxes in the medieval world were as inevitable as mud and twice as confusing. You paid tithes to the church, fees to the Lord, and random levies for things like using the oven, grazing sheep, or sneezing near a bishop. Historians still argue whether medieval taxation was a clever way to fund public works or just a series of increasingly creative wallet extractions. You grumble, but Wyman has already moved on to bother the next door over. You fold the parchment into a small square, mutter something unprintable, and stuff it into the firewood pile for later. No sense worrying now. Taxes come and go. What matters more is that the stew's bubbling over the hearth, and the turnips haven't burned yet. You toss in a handful of herbs, some stale bread chunks, and the last of the dried onions. It smells better than it should. Medieval cooking was often a matter of throwing in whatever wouldn't kill you and hoping for the best. Recipes. Those were for monasteries and royalty. You, however, cook by smell, guesswork, and the occasional desperate prayer. You eat by the fire as dusk slides into place. The stew is hot, lumpy, and tastes mostly like onions. You are grateful. Afterward, you scrub the bowl with a twist of straw, rinse it with the last of the ale, and call it clean. You could boil water, but it's late and you're tired. You pat your stomach, stretch your back, and shuffle to the door for one last look outside. The village is quiet now. Smoke drifts from chimneys. A goat bleats in the distance, offended by something unknowable. Stars begin to wink into view, though clouds still loiter at the edges. You hear the faint rhythm of someone chopping wood. Somewhere, a lute is playing badly. You lean on the door frame, letting your body rest. Tomorrow might bring another surprise tax, or a church feast, or a sick neighbor who needs tending. But tonight, you have a belly full of stew, a clean bowl, and a roof that, while leaky, is at least still mostly attached. The chicken hops onto your foot. You don't even flinch anymore. You reach down and gently move her off, muttering, "You're not getting my bread." And that's final. She clucks, unimpressed. Inside, the fire crackles low. You settle onto your straw mat and tug your rough blanket over your shoulders. It's scratchy and smells faintly of sheep, but it's warm. You shift once, twice, then sigh deeply. Your body is tired, but in the best way, like it earned this rest, like it knows tomorrow will come, but right now doesn't care. You listen to the wind slip through the cracks in the walls, to the soft scrape of a mouse exploring a corner, to the rhythmic wheeze of your own breath. Life in the medieval world isn't heroic. It's not glamorous. It's mud and bread and taxes and turnips. But it's yours. And for this one, quiet moment, it's enough. You wake before dawn, not because you want to, but because your body has been trained by the sun. The cold, and that one rooster who still thinks screaming at 4 a.m. is a personality trait. The fire has gone out. Again, you fumble in the dark, feeling for the warmest patch of straw and doing a small mental debate about whether it's worth restarting the hearth now or just wrapping yourself tighter and hoping your breath doesn't turn into visible mist. Eventually, practicality wins over comfort. You need warmth, and more importantly, you need something hot in your stomach before the day begins its usual assault. You stoke the ashes back to life, carefully feeding them dried twigs and whispering encouragement like they're a shy house guest. The flames respond slowly, reluctantly. You feel very seen. While the fire gains confidence, you pull on your clothes still slightly damp from yesterday's rain and lace up your worn boots, which seem to be made from leather, hope, and a small amount of wishful thinking. Breakfast is modest, some leftover stew, a heel of yesterday's bread, and a swallow of weak ale. You sit by the fire as the world outside begins to hum with life, distant hooves on cobblestones, a cartwheel squeaking, someone shouting at a pig who has almost certainly made a poor life decision. You breathe deeply. The smells of wood smoke, old onions, and something faintly barnyardish fill your nose. It's familiar, not pleasant exactly, but comforting in its own earthy way. Today is your turn to help with thatching repairs. The roof over the mill is beginning to shed straw like a molting bird. So you join the small cluster of neighbors already up there, bundled against the wind and wielding bundles of reeds like oversized paintbrushes. You tie, tuck, and weave, hands growing numb but working on instinct. The wind howls, and someone nearly loses a hat to the heavens. You laugh together, then go right back to working. No one complains. Or rather, Everyone complains just enough to feel better without expecting sympathy. That's the medieval spirit. By midday, your arms ache and your stomach growls. A neighbor shares a scrap of salted fish. You nod in thanks. The wind smells of peat fires and distant cabbage. The rest of the day passes in a slow, bone-tired rhythm. Fix a beam, tie a bundle, step carefully, repeat. Your muscles are learning the choreography of survival. You head home as the sun dips behind the hills, painting everything in dull amber light. Your feet are muddy, your hands scratched, but your spirit is strangely calm. You pass the church, hear the soft toll of the bell, past the blacksmiths, where sparks dance in the twilight, past the children kicking a rock with the seriousness of a royal tournament. You remember the first time you walked these streets nervous, unfamiliar with the rhythm, not yet molded by the daily demands. Now, you move like water in an old stream bed. You belong here. Back home, you light your little oil lamp, not for work, just to watch the flame. You sip some lukewarm broth and listen to the evening settle in. The chicken is asleep. The hearth glows softly, and outside, the stars blink awake, one by one. This life, muddy, scratchy, sometimes unfair, is also strangely whole. Every ache in your back, every callus on your palm, every half-joking complaint about turnips. It's a badge of having made it another day in a world without guarantees. That's something sacred. So you close your eyes, pull the blanket tight, and sink into sleep, knowing you've done what you needed to do. You're tired, you're full, you're here, and that, somehow, is everything. Word count 1065. Wind down 300 words. Now, as you rest in this medieval stillness, let your mind begin to float. There's nothing left to carry, no straw to fetch, no taxes to dread. The fire burns low, casting long, flickering shadows along the stone walls of your humble home. Outside, the night air is cool and quiet. Maybe there's a gentle rain whispering against the thatch, or the distant call of an owl, reminding you that you're not alone. Even in the dark, the world has folded itself into silence, and you, too, are allowed to let go. Your body lies heavy now, sinking deeper into warmth and safety. The rough fabric of your blanket wraps you like the arms of time itself, old and constant. Breathe in, slow, steady. Let your thoughts wander down a quiet lane, past the baker's shuttered window, past the flickering chapel candle, past the still fields waiting for morning light. You have lived a whole day chopped, hauled, baked, repaired, endured, and now you've earned this stillness, this moment, this soft letting go. Let your breath ease. Let your heartbeat slow. Let every noise from the outside world soften into a gentle blur. The wind, the fire, the night, they are all keeping watch. You don't need to. Sleep comes slowly here, like a friend arriving late, but bearing warmth. So close your eyes, drift down into the quiet, and know that you are safe. You are warm, and tomorrow, if it must come, can wait.